all Indigenous peoples, and we look forward to continue this conversation and fostering the path towards reconciliation.
Thank you very much. All right, we'll move straight to presentations. Is Lyle in the room this evening? No, he's not. Okay. So as many of us well know in North Grenville, through the Neon Night fundraiser, which was a major community initiative for which there was significant support over so many years, the community had a chance to recognize Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. Council has been invited to declare September 2022 once again as Childhood Cancer Awareness Month and direct the Childhood Cancer Flag to be raised September 1st to the 30th. So that's what's on the table this evening, colleagues. I'll look for a mover and a seconder. Councillor Wilson, Councillor O'Sullivan, thank you, to adopt September 2022 as Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. Any questions or concerns, colleagues? Okay. And once again, I think we want to recognize the formidable efforts that brought Neon Night into existence here in North Grenville. I learned around the time that I was quite involved, and some of us were quite involved in Neon Night, that the Neon Night fundraiser in its day was Eastern Ontario's largest cancer fundraiser for childhood cancers in particular. It had an enormous impact actually in supporting CHEO in advancing some very, very critical childhood cancer research. So very grateful that people continue to mark Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, and we know there are a number of children in our community have been deeply affected, of course, and their families have too. So great to see this being recognized once again. With a mover and a seconder, I'll call the question. All in favor? Good. All right, that carries. Now we'll move on to our consent agenda, and council colleagues, you're aware that consent agenda items are proposed so that we can adopt them all at once if there are no objections and get to the meat of the meeting, if you will. You'll see on tonight's agenda a joint compliance audit committee report, as well as minutes from our Ag and Rural Advisory Committee meeting and our Community and Economic Development Advisory Committee meeting, as well as council minutes from July 11th. Are there any objections with the proposed consent agenda items? Seeing none, I'll look for a mover and a seconder. Councillor Wilson, Councillor Barclay. Councillor Wilson and Barclay will move the adoption of items under the consent agenda. Any comments or concerns? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Good, thank you. So now we'll move on. We don't have any reports from the Office of the CEO this evening, nor Finance. We've dealt with the matter under Office of the Clerk through our consent agenda. So we'll move into our first public meeting this evening, and that is for ZBA 08-2022-2627 Bedell Road. And I'll just get the public notice. And this, of course, this script is provided by the province, and we must read it verbatim so that the meeting is properly convened. It is council's obligation to provide these parameters for the meeting in order that we actually proceed with the substance of the application. So council will now hold a public meeting to consider an application to amend the zoning on the lands at 2627 Bedell Road from institutional to rural exception RU67. I must advise you that this meeting, of course, is your opportunity to voice any objections or concerns you may have with the application. If an appellant does not provide oral comments at this meeting or written submissions before council considers the proposed amendment, the local planning appeal tribunal may refuse to consider objections. Any persons wishing further notice of council's decision should direct Amy Martin to collect that information. Contact information can be found on the notice of public meeting, and of course Ms. Martin is here with us this evening. Anyone wishing to ask a question during the public meeting will have the opportunity to do so after we hear from the applicant and or his representatives, and we'd appreciate your name and address just for the purposes of minuting. So I'll pass the mic now over to Amy, who will give council a review of the file.
Thank you, Your Worship. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right, so okay, there it goes. So our first public meeting tonight is to consider a zoning bylaw amendment for a property on Bedell Road from the institutional zone to a rural exception zone. So the property is located on part of the S-curve and on Bedell Road, just on the south side of the train track. The lands surrounding, just to the north, are the Kemptville campus lands, and you have Victoria Park up on the top left, as well as surrounding rural residential uses along Bedell Road. Next slide, please. The aerial photograph just gives you a bit of a picture of the development within the area and what's on the ground. And we'll go to the next slide, please. As well as a land use designation from the official plan. So the property is designated agriculture as per Land Use Schedule A of North Grenville's official plan. Next slide, please. So a little bit of overview of the application. The proposed development would permit an industrial hemp operation and the construction of an agricultural research facility to permit the land to be used for hemp cultivation, processing, and storage of hemp seeds, grains, stems, leaves, and flowering heads. As mentioned, the lands are designated agriculture on Schedule A of North Grenville's official plan, and the current zoning is institutional, and the proposed zoning would be a rural exception zone that would permit the uses. So we are holding a public meeting tonight to have to hear comments from the public and members of council and address the application tonight and any questions that may arise as part of the public process. Next slide, please. So the applicant has provided a concept plan for the development of the property. So the proposed development will be located closer to Bedell Road, trying to stay away from the existing railway line and giving a buffer from the railway itself. It would consist of a warehouse, which would be partly associated with the research facility, as well as greenhouses and an area identified for outdoor cultivation on the property. A vegetative buffer would be retained around the perimeter of the property and currently exists. And they're looking to reduce the zone standards for the rural zone slightly to push the greenhouses from 12 meters down to 8 meters from a setback to the Bedell Road. Next slide, please. So when we consider a planning application under the Planning Act, we have to have regard for the provincial policy statement, also known as the PPS. So policies under the provincial policy statement include that rural development should promote diversification of the economic base and employment opportunities for residents. Agriculture and agriculture-related and on-farm diversified uses and normal farm practices are permitted uses on rural lands and on prime agricultural lands, and development shall promote efficient development and land use patterns which sustain the well-being of the province and municipalities over the long term. Next slide, please. Underneath the provincial policy statement, we have the United Counties of Leeds and Grenville's official plan. So the United Counties official plan provides planning direction at more of a regional level and includes North Grenville. So the lands that are designated agricultural area, as the property is in the United Counties official plan, and there are also potential for natural heritage systems on the property as identified within that land use schedule of the county's OP. There are agricultural uses are primary activities within the agricultural designation, and agricultural operations should be promoted, especially when it positively contributes to fostering a diverse, innovative, and economically strong agricultural industry. The potential for natural heritage area was investigated through a memo in 2021, and it was determined that there are no wetland communities within the subject property in satisfaction of Section 4.2 of the county's official plan. Next slide, please. And underneath the county's official plan, we have our own municipal official plan, which provides planning guidance and policy for development within North Grenville. So as mentioned, the land is designated agricultural, and there is a flag for significant woodlands and unevaluated wetlands in our official plan. Similar to the provincial policy statement and the county's official plan, a healthy and productive agricultural industry is a key component of the municipality's economic base, and all forms of agriculture are permitted within the designation, and accessory uses that produce value-added agricultural products from the operation are also appropriate. So there was a memo, again, that memo prepared back in 2021 demonstrated that there were no wetlands present and that the forested lands which have been cleared, therefore no significant woodlands remain. Next slide, please. I'm going to take some time to summarize the comments that we received. So what I'll do first is I'll walk council and the public, as well as the applicant, through who has submitted comments and letters of objection. And then I will do a very high-level summary of the comments that were received. For the public record, I will state that all comments that have been received have been provided to council for their consideration and review. I will also note they've also been provided to the applicant for their review and response, and the applicant has provided 2 letters of response to date in regards to the comments that have been received, and those have been forwarded on to the individuals who submitted questions in regards to the application. So we have received an email correspondence from Ms. Anne Marie Bridger, who sought additional information, as well as a letter of objection submitted once additional information had also been provided. We had email correspondence from the Clearys expressing concerns with the proposed use, seeking additional information, and expressing concerns with the species at risk in relation to the development, as well as a subsequent letter of objection was sent in to the municipality. We had email correspondence from Mr. McFadden expressing his thanks for being circulated. We received a letter of no objection from the health unit. There was a second letter that was provided to the municipality, but the health unit had asked that they wanted to withdraw their letter in response to some information that was provided by the applicant. So they are reconsidering the information that they had provided. We had an email from our Emergency and Protective Services and the Building Department regarding the need for on-site water storage for firefighting purposes. And I will also note, at the time of the posting of the presentation, we received additional information that came in. We also received a letter of objection from the McLaren family, from Ben, Scott, and Nora, in regards to their objection to the proposed development. So I'm going to provide just a high-level list of the concerns and comments that were provided to the municipality in regards to the application. Comments provided included the long-term impact on surrounding residents, the poor location for the proposed project, water consumption and runoff and impact to water within the area, highly vulnerable aquifer and wellhead protection area concerns, odor, land clearing, wetland features, and blending turtle impact on property values, additional traffic that will be coming in and out of the site that didn't exist prior, as well as lighting from greenhouses and on the buildings. And again, it's a summary of the comments that were provided, not a full comprehensive deep dive into everything that was written in the letters, which again have been provided to members of council and the applicant for their consideration. Next slide, please. So that concludes the formal part of our presentation. I will turn it back over to Mayor Peckford to open it up for public comments, including comments from the applicant. Thank you.
Council colleagues, any any questions to Amy before I invite the applicant to speak and the members of the public? Council Barkley?
I note that a letter was received from the health unit saying there's no objection. Do we normally go to the health unit for an application like this?
Through your worship to Councillor Barkley, as prescribed by the regulations of the Planning Act, the health unit is one of the required public bodies that we must circulate.
And I've read a letter from the applicant where he took issue with some of the comments made in the original letter that has been withheld from or withdrawn, excuse me, thank you. Have they indicated how they will respond and when they'll respond to the applicant?
Through your worship, at this time, no. They'd indicated that they were going to reevaluate the information that was provided by the applicant, but certainly staff can follow up to see if they intend to submit a revised letter to the municipality or just completely retract their previous letter based on new information received.
Your worship. So normally we would, whether they respond by letter or not, is a letter required in order to go forward with the application?
Through your worship, nope, not at all, in the sense that they are a public commenting agency. So depending on the application, they may or may not comment. Typically, with rural applications, they'll comment because currently they are a septic service provider. So that's typically their scope. But on certain matters, they may provide additional information as it might pertain to matters and topics such as hemp.
Just to wrap it up. So they haven't indicated whether they will respond?
Through your worship, and not at this time. They were going to go back and take the information they had received, but did not indicate whether or not they were going to submit an additional letter.
Okay. Well, I hope they do.
Any other questions, council colleagues? Amy, I just wanted to ask quickly about that distinction between industrial hemp and cannabis. As you know, this council and the community had expressed a lot of concerns about the parameters under which cannabis is grown, indoors, outdoors, and some of the impacts on neighbors, the community writ large. Can you just help me understand again why we make that distinction between industrial hemp and cannabis? Or how we make that distinction?
Thank you, Your Worship. So from a zoning perspective, the distinction is made within our zoning bylaw provision for what is defined as cannabis, and we have defined cannabis to not be industrial hemp. And the rationale behind that is that it's regulated differently by Health Canada in regards to how it's grown and the measures that have to be taken. Certainly, the regulations at Health Canada's level are quite stringent for cannabis facilities, but the same type of rigor is not required. More so in regard to the fact that the components that make cannabis, have the components that it does to cause the effects is not present in regards to the amount of THC within the plant. And I'm sure that the applicant can provide more information on that as it is a bit more in his area of expertise on the plant itself.
And are you aware of municipalities that treat industrial hemp and cannabis the same?
Through my research in regards to the cannabis bylaw and the study that I put together, I didn't come across, or I don't recall, there being any municipality that conflated them to be as the same. Typically, definitions that I came across excluded industrial hemp from the definition of cannabis, as it was viewed more as an agricultural crop. So it wasn't regulated in the same way that municipalities were doing with cannabis production.
Council colleagues, I'll go to the applicant unless there are other questions. Not seeing any. So we'll invite the applicant or the applicant's representatives to come forward, and then, of course, we'll go to members of our community. So welcome, and if you could just introduce yourselves. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Bridget Alchawa. I am a land use planner with McIntosh Perry, and I was retained as the land use planner for this project. First off, we just wanted to say thank you to planning staff. They were very helpful and responsive throughout the process, and we appreciate it very much. I'm here with Dr. Gussain. He is the owner and developer for the property, and given that we are proceeding with a staff report for recommendation and the number of people that we anticipate being here tonight, he's going to give a brief supplemental presentation, and then we're happy to move to questions if that suits.
Great. Thank you for considering my application. So I just want to introduce my business partner. Also behind me is David Murtaugh. So he's the vice president of my company. And thank you for everyone that's attending the meeting. So to start, I'm a new resident of Kemptville, or going to be anyway. I'm building a house on 2530 Bedell Road, which is the property right next door, and I look forward to living in the town. So I'm a physician. I'm a researcher at the Ottawa Hospital, and I'm also a CEO of a biotech company focused on industrial hemp and how it could impact health. So my company essentially creates new industrial hemp varieties that other farmers cultivate across Canada and then use for medicinal research and to supply to other companies. Our main product is actually feminized seeds, so we provide seeds to other farmers to grow. When I purchased this land, I think it was very important to note that this land was purchased from the former agricultural college. It has now become a very research-heavy center because there's a lot of professors, actually from the University of Ottawa, that's leasing space and conducting research on the land. And having this land also being used for a research purpose, I think is very fitting with what we're proposing today. And it's very nice to see that, Kemptville, especially the heart of Kemptville, is going to become more of an agricultural research hub. So that's very interesting to note. So in evaluating the comments received by, neighbors and other residents in the area, I'd like to state what this is not. This is not a cannabis or marijuana production facility. I've actually never consumed any cannabis or marijuana myself. There is no security or fencing bylaws required for industrial hemp. There is no significant odors emitted by industrial hemp. There is no psychoactive components in industrial hemp flower. There is no abuse potential or street value to industrial hemp. And it's actually a standard agricultural crop that's being grown by farmers in Kemptville. And we're very familiar with people in the area that are currently growing industrial hemp. If this zoning application was for agricultural, if we were just going to rezone for agricultural, we didn't even need to put a site plan or anything. We could have put our greenhouses in cultivated industrial hemp under standard ag zoning. There's no special requirements needed. The purpose of this rezoning, specifying that this is a hemp processing and production facility, was a preference from planning department so that the community is aware of what's going to be placed on this lands. But there's nothing prohibiting anyone in the town that has ag zoned land to be doing everything included in this zoning amendment, other obviously than the setbacks that are changed. There is nothing other prohibiting what we're doing here today. Just to put perspective of our biotech company, we range from 6 to 10 employees. We're all highly educated and skilled. We're a mix of, obviously, a medical doctor. We have a PhD in agricultural, master's students, and other agronomists. We're very research heavy, as I stated, and we ship seeds to farms across Canada. And this is going to be a few greenhouses and cultivation area where we're going to be putting out experimental industrial hemp varieties that are going to be inspected and approved so that other farmers across Canada could be growing the same varieties on their farms. In evaluating, and I'll be brief because I know I've been taking up some time here, in evaluating the main complaints received, I'd like to address them. So the first is water usage. A lot of residents were concerned about the water because it's a well water in the area. I'd like to state that we're actually going to be putting one standard residential sized well on the property. I've put a well on the adjacent land on my house, and splash well drilling noted that it reached a maximum tested flow rate of 20 gallons per minute, and they had no objection with water usage on this property. And like I said, if there was going to be one house or one dwelling on this land, we would have put the same standard well. So we're not using a lot of water, in fact, for the cultivation of the hemp. And in terms of wastewater, a lot of residents were also concerned about wastewater containing fertilizers, metals, or pesticides. In fact, because industrial hemp is not a very highly cultivated crop across Canada, there's not a lot of pesticides approved for use on industrial hemp. And in fact, we actually test for pesticides and heavy metals to make sure that there are no pesticides and heavy metals, especially when you're supplying other farmers across Canada. So there's going to be no fertilizers or pesticides or heavy metals going to be leaked in the wastewater, and there's going to be no contamination of the area. In terms of lighting, of course, when you talk about a greenhouse that's going to be lit with lights, you worry that that's going to have light pollution around the area. And we've considered that, and all our greenhouses are being equipped with a curtain that blacks out light so that there's going to be no light pollution at all. And they're automated according to light cycle. Yeah, that's right. So there's going to be no light pollution emitted from the greenhouses. And finally, I'd like to note, just as you noted as well, that the city's own planning department recommended approval, and Health Canada actually had no objection because they already licensed the location for what we're doing. So we already have a license to proceed with industrial hemp cultivation and processing on this site. And I could provide that to planning department if needed. I'd like to note, so a lot of comments that you received, I've answered every single comment by email. I've included scientific data in all my responses. There's no pending written comments other than, of course, the ones that we're going to receive today that have been unanswered. So there's no further questions or comments by writing or by email that have went unanswered. And there's no other studies pending before going to building permits. So everything that I could provide, obviously prior to receiving the comments today, have been answered appropriately. So that's everything I wanted to say. So thank you for considering this application, and I look forward to answering the questions from the members of the public.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. So any questions for the applicant, council colleagues, before we go to members of the public? I know we've received quite a bit of correspondence, so maybe any questions? Okay. So then, is there anyone who's with us this evening that would like to speak or ask questions? This is your opportunity. I'm sorry?
My name? Oh. Oh.
No, it was just the information that he provided, the supplemental information. We didn't want to repeat what Ms. Martin had presented.
So anyone wishing to speak does have to use the mic. So we'll ask the applicant. Thank you. And is it Bridget? Did I hear that right? Yep. To vacate so that we can properly record and hear. And this meeting is being streamed. So it's important that people come to the mic. We apologize. We know not everyone enjoys that, but that's really the best way to capture your comments. Thank you. And if you could just introduce yourself.
Just bear with me. I don't wish to speak, but I have to.
Understood. So
I'm
if you could
Anne-Marie
just provide
Bridger.
your name and address. Thank you.
Yep. I'm Anne-Marie Bridger, and I'm very slow. I live at 2460 Bedell Road.
Okay.
And just to give you a little
And
back.
if you could, I'm so sorry, it's just hard to hear you. So if you put the mic a little bit closer, it'll make a big difference. Thank you. Okay, no problem. And council colleagues, so we'll just invite members of the public to express themselves, then we'll do another round of questions, and then we'll move forward. Go ahead, thank you.
Okay, is this
Yes,
better?
now we can hear you. Awesome.
I even found the right page. I'm Anne-Marie Bridger. I live on Bedell Road. Just for a bit of context, perspective on my background, I've been a resident of Bedell Road for over 35 years. My husband's family for even longer. I am a strong supporter of agriculture in general and farmers in particular, local farmers even more in particular. My husband and I have both worked on farms in our teens and in our early 20s. We even met as students at Kemptville College of Agricultural Technology. And my dad was a class of 37 graduate from Kemptville Agricultural School. So I support agriculture, and although it's not my favorite thing, I don't protest agricultural practices like spreading liquid manure around. But I don't think that's what we're talking about today. I don't think it's a normal agricultural practice. I have a lot of comments which I forced a lot of you guys to read, and I apologize for my long-winded submission, but it is near and dear to my heart. So, Dr. Gassam, I understand from what you just told us that your operation, sorry, I can't turn around and look at you and get the microphone at the same time, it's very disconcerting, that what you're doing is essentially you're involved in the production of seeds that you guys are distributing to other farmers across Canada, right? You're modifying making seeds. So you're not producing any edibles or consumables, no hemp seed to go on my granola or hemp milk to go in my smoothie or CBD oil, none of those help. So you're not producing any kind of foodstuffs for people. And you're not producing hemp for fiber that are going to make my textiles or my clothes or anything. And you're not making biofuels, biodiesel, bio anything with this hemp product.
I mean, our research interest might differ in the future, but at current stage, we don't have any research projects in those areas.
Okay, so you're not doing any of the cultivation or production for those
Not for
things.
those purposes. Is that correct?
Okay. Okay, right, so which part did you miss? Basically, Dr. Gassam said that they will not be producing hemp seeds for food, any kind of foodstuffs at all, any kind of consumable, no hemp fiber, and no biofuels. Given that, and that the North Grenville's Cannabis Act specifically says that the definition of cannabis, this definition does not include the industrial or agricultural production of hemp, which is a source of foodstuffs, i.e., hemp milk, hemp seed, hemp oil, fiber, or biofuels. Therefore, this cannabis, industrial hemp, does fall under North Grenville's cannabis bylaw, and therefore, this application has to be rejected. It can't be accepted in the rural zone. It falls under the cannabis definition in North Grenville's bylaw.
Just hear comments, and then we'll have council seek clarification either from the applicant or our director of planning. So we thank you for expressing that. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, that really should just cut it off right there because it has to be rejected right away. But if for some reason it's not, then yes, I have objections on all sorts of other fronts. The idea that there is no odor to industrial hemp has kind of been disproved many times. People are complaining about it all over. And the proportion of what's being built here and projected to be built is just totally not suitable to the size of the land, whether it was zoned rural or agricultural or whatever. It's just totally disproportionate and not reflecting the local nature environment. Should I stop there and let you discuss that point, or?
Sure. Well, we're going to invite other members of the public to speak. So is there anyone else who wishes to present to council or seek clarification on any of the items? Okay, come on down. Thank you very much.
Hopefully this works out. Can you hear me?
It is just, if you raise it a little bit, it'll be closer to your...
My name is Jennifer Cleary,
Okay.
and I'm speaking for the turtles, which live in the marsh there and go up and down the road. And I did send you a photograph of a squashed
Thank you.
one, mature female with eggs. And they are threatened, and as such, they're entitled to protection under the Ontario Endangered Species Act. So that's what I would like to say. And I've lived there for 44 years, and that area's always been wet. So,
And the number of turtles you've seen is consistent over the decades?
yes, I've seen them beside the marsh, and this was in June of this year. So,
Okay. And
Yeah.
currently no signage, is that correct?
pardon?
There is no signage currently for the turtles? to
No,
alert
there's
people?
nothing, but it
Nothing.
wouldn't stop them from
Yes, indeed.
going to their nest site, which is along the side of the road or wherever. So something
Yes.
should be done.
For sure. Thank you. And thank you for your email. I did take
Okay.
note. Thanks.
I'm also concerned about everything that Anne Marie mentioned,
Okay.
water usage, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to speak? Not seeing anyone. Okay, then I will look to council colleagues for any questions in regards to comments that were made by the applicant and/or members of the public. I do have a question around the vulnerable aquifer. I know that that's a concern that often is raised. This certainly was raised when it came to the cannabis facility, but really the protection of North Grenville's highly vulnerable aquifer, I think, is a point that preoccupies many for good reason. People are relying on water. They're relying on good wells. They want uncontaminated water for all the right reasons. So, Ms. Martin, I know you did speak to that a little bit, but I'm wondering if there's any clarity you could provide, because I recognize and I think council recognizes our aquifers are vulnerable and they are classified as such. So when these sorts of applications come forward, when there's a high degree of water usage, right, from one of the shared aquifers, how do you evaluate the application and the viability of the source of water?
Thank you, Your Worship. So the property is located within a wellhead protection area as identified by our source water protection plan. So staff have reached out to the appropriate individuals at the RVCA who are responsible for the implementation of the source water protection plan. And from the email, they did a review based on the proposed development, and it was their opinion that nothing is required under the Clean Water Act to proceed with the development proposal. So they did do a screen for it in regards to the policies within the plan, and there's nothing that would, if from their perspective, prevent or require additional, plans for the development in regards to the aquifer/wellhead protection area.
In regards to wildlife and council, please raise your hands if you have questions or comments. Turtles in particular, we know again that across North Grenville, turtle habitat matters a lot. How does the Conservation Authority or how does our own municipality evaluate loss of habitat? Certainly recognizing, of course, there's lots of habitat across the municipality, but what do we do in those situations where we might see active use of certain private or public lands for turtle habitats? How do we evaluate that particular usage, if you will, by wildlife when it comes to these sorts of proposals?
Thank you, Your Worship. So when the applicant purchased the property, this was a point of discussion with the Conservation Authority and the municipality, and they did provide demonstration, and they hired Macintosh Perry to go out and evaluate the property in regards to the unevaluated wetland that was present on our official plan mapping, and it was determined that there was no wetland on the property based on the standards that were used within the memo.
So it's only in the case of wetlands that you are able to advance any provisions to protect?
So in regards to, it's the official plan that is the trigger. So where on our natural heritage layer we show that there's potential for a wetland or another natural heritage feature, we do ask for a study to be done to determine whether or not the presence is there. It is a common request, and prior to any clearing on the property, the applicant did provide the memo to the municipality and the Conservation Authority with the conclusion from their professional they hired through Macintosh Perry to evaluate.
Okay. Colleagues, any other questions? Councillor Sullivan, Councillor Barclay, go ahead. And I'm just grabbing water, so go ahead.
Thank you, through your worship, to Dr. Goshen. Can you respond to the concern about odor? I think we've had a concern about a cannabis operation in North Grenville that the odor was a significant nuisance to the neighbors. And now I understand the difference between hemp and cannabis, but I just wanted to be sure, because we've heard people say that they're concerned about potential odor, and you have said that there isn't. but I'd like to know some solid evidence that there won't be odor from it. And you mentioned that there wouldn't be any fertilizers or pesticides, but what about herbicides? It's going to be organic? Okay.
Okay, I'd like to answer this question and just to respond very quickly to the first two comments received by the public.
Sure.
So the first comment on the definition of industrial hemp, I'd like to state that we don't supply seed and fiber that are being consumed because other farmers are growing our seeds who are then supplying their hemp for seed, fiber, and other uses standard for industrial hemp. And just because the industrial hemp definition of North Grenville is not comprehensive doesn't mean that this no longer becomes not industrial hemp. But like I said, we supply seed to other farmers who then do the uses that are described in that definition. And then in response to comment 2, we did do an environmental screen before land clearing, which did not identify any turtles or other species that needed to be protected at the time of screen, which was in fact in June. Like the high season for these turtles to be breeding in the area. So in response to your question about herbicides, we also do not use any herbicides. There are herbicides approved for use in industrial hemp, but we do not cultivate using herbicides like you had mentioned. Organic. We don't have you need to certify your land to have certified organic. But we do cultivate organic, but do not have a certified. We've never tried to apply for the certified organic designation, but in fact, we are growing organic in a sense that we do not use fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, or any other components on the plant.
Okay, thank you very much. And just back to the odor issue.
Mm-hmm.
Odor,
Sorry, I didn't answer the odor issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll answer the odor issue. So the odor comes from terpene compounds. These are compounds released by plants that have a smell. The difference between industrial hemp and cannabis when it comes to odors is the concentration of these terpenes in the flower itself. So as you know, cannabis or marijuana is meant to be smoked. So those strains are highly selected for a very high concentration of odors and smells because they want that to be appealing for the person that's smoking it. So when there's a cannabis facility, of course, there's a lot of odor. Now, industrial hemp varieties, which are different than cannabis and marijuana, they are not bred for high terpene compound content. So they are very low. We've actually measured them in our varieties, and they are about 15 times lower in concentration in the mature flower. And they also don't have the same types of smells that marijuana and cannabis does. So there's hundreds of different smells that could be emitted by these plants, and the ones from industrial hemp are not the same as marijuana and cannabis. And there is scientific literature that I've actually sent to the Lanark County Health Unit on this because they had the same questions. So I'm happy to forward that article to you to demonstrate that. And other than the article that is in the scientific literature, we also have internal testing that we could send demonstrating that the terpene content in hemp flower is indeed much lower than marijuana and cannabis. So hopefully that answers that concern. Not to say that there will be no smell. It's not that there's going to be no smell, but it's not a skunky smell. It's more of like an earthy, like just another crop type of smell, and only present in peak of flower at a potency that is much, like we're talking logarithmic scale, less than what is typically found in a marijuana or cannabis facility.
Okay, thank you. And the greenhouses are ventilated, or is there
So the greenhouse has to be ventilated in a sense that otherwise you'll have powdery mildew and other fungi that are going to. So there's fans in the greenhouse to have some air circulation, but that is the extent of what is needed for the greenhouse.
Any requirement for any carbon filters?
There is no requirement for carbon filters for industrial hemp cultivation, and it's not needed either.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
No problem.
Councillor Barkley?
Yeah, full disclosure, I live on Bedell Road, albeit at the Oxford Mills end. And when the land first started to get cleared, of course, my phone rang off the hook, and my neighbors are all asking me what was going on. So I've kept them up to speed, and I'm surprised that most of them aren't here tonight. So possibly they've read the documents and their concerns have been allayed. Certainly, generally speaking, I'm in favor of the recommendation that staff has brought forward. But I am curious, you wrote a very detailed rebuttal to the letter that we don't have in this package that the health unit supplied. And I appreciate that this is a research facility and this is a new market, but it seems like the health unit is not up to speed if I put a lot of credence into the points that you made. I'm just concerned, and I'm apt to, suggest that this is deferred until we can get a response from the health unit. Director Martin has said it's not required, that they don't have to respond, but they did respond in such a way that I think your rebuttal, is quite damning, actually, that their lack of information about what you're doing. So, just for the sake of future projects, I would like to see it deferred until we can get a letter from them if they so choose. So that's my comment. Thanks.
Just in response to that, they did submit a statement of no objection. So irrespective of the statement that they're submitting, they are not objecting to the application. And most of their statement pertained to cannabis, which is why I submitted the rebuttal and saying all of these concerns that you're submitting in your letter is for cannabis and not industrial hemp. And so I don't know that that information is actually going to change the matters in question today, but of course that's your prerogative of receiving that information or not would make a difference on the rezoning application.
Well, yeah, point taken that they haven't filed no objection, but I found their letter quite surprising.
Council colleagues on this side of the house, anything? No? I just have a quick question about drainage, and I know it was briefly addressed, but certainly a couple of neighboring properties have signal drainage. We know we have lands that are wet in many parts of the municipality, so again, I'm just curious on how lands will be drained or if they become wetter by virtue of the use. I know there are differing opinions about how much water industrial hemp consumes overall, but can you speak to drainage, just generally?
Yes. The drainage plan is going to be submitted at the time of a building permit application. Right now, we did provide a concept plan, but it was pending the outcome of the zoning bylaw amendment application. And in North Grenville's building bylaw, where they outline the material that's required for a building permit, sufficient grading information is one of the requirements on there. As well, they can require other details to ensure that it does drain properly, so that will be dealt with at the building permit stage.
And are there different kinds of drainage that one could pursue for the hemp production? And to that end, what's the footprint at this point? Are you planning to use all 14 acres, 12 acres? What's the proposed acreage for the industrial hemp right now?
For the outdoor field, we're not proposing to use more than 3 acres in the beginning stage. We might expand depending on our needs to the rest of the land, but at current stage, it's 3 acres. In terms of drainage, drainage is going to be consistent with what is typically found on a farm. So, farmers need to drain their fields depending on how wet they are. They might decide to tile drain, and so if we find that our fields are wet, we are going to tile drain them. And like you had mentioned, we're going to be evaluating that at building permit stage depending on the final size of the buildings that are going to be built on the property.
Okay, perfect, Thank you. Colleagues, anything else? Certainly, I'm hearing from Councillor Barkley, Councillor Barkley, potentially an appetite to defer just based upon some forthcoming information. The recommendation is before us. That being said, we still are in the public meeting, so I'll just look to the room. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to the application at this stage? Yeah, you're welcome to make one more comment, for sure. And then I will just look, of course, there are many other applications this evening, so just in the interest of everyone's time, if I don't see any other indications of people willing to speak, I'll close the public meeting, and then we'll deal with the recommendation and where we'll go this evening. Go ahead. And if you could please, I apologize, but if you could please speak into the mic, we'll be able to hear you better.
I still have the same argument that I think it falls under the Cannabis Act, but I'll leave that aside for the moment because hopefully you'll discuss that and agree with me. I do have concerns or questions about the fact that there is no air filtration control planned at all. And I understand you're saying that industrial hemp has a much lower terpene count, and that could be true. It probably is true. I'm not saying I don't believe you because I don't know enough about this stuff. But is there a way that council can require regularly scheduled testings or something to make sure that this is the case and make sure that there is some air filtration system if it is required? Because, you know, this could be valid. The new seed that you're making, maybe it is different and it doesn't have the terpenes. I don't know, but I think that should be kept in consideration. I also object to the request to reduce the setback from 12 meters to 8, pushing all of this closer to us instead of closer to the railroad track where there's fewer people. So I don't know, seeing as how there's not real support of this along the road, it would be better for our sakes, make better neighbors if we could have it further than closer, and reducing the setback just seems a bit much. The height of the building, the requirement to alter that from whatever it is, 6 meters to 15 meters makes it equal to a 5-story building. That's a bit much as well, so I would like that to be strongly considered here, because once again, that does not fit into our landscape. It does not blend, which I believe is one of both the municipality of North Grenville's, policy statements and the province, that the things should blend in. And I have another, just a little question, because in Director Martin's presentation, there was something about the PPS 1.14 saying that we support or recommend or whatever employment for new facilities like this for local residents. I'm just curious how many of the positions will be given to local residents as opposed to people that are coming in. And I'll leave it at that for the moment. I have a long list at home, but it's late and I'm tired too.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to mention that if there's a list of questions that you'd like to submit in writing, I'm happy to answer all of them by email as well if we don't have the time to speak to today. In terms of air filtration system, as mentioned, it is not required by Health Canada, and the reason why it's not required is because it's not needed. We are happy to consider an air filtration system if it becomes an issue, but at current stage, it's never become an issue at the 4 or 5 farms we've leased in the past to cultivate industrial hemp. So that's to cover that issue. The setbacks are needed because of the mandatory requirements of building away from the railroad. So there's a 30-meter setback from the railroad, which pushes us further to the front end of the property. So that's why we need to be a bit closer. Whether, change from 8 to 12 meters, I don't think is going to make a big difference in terms of necessarily being closer to our facilities. But it's going to make a difference for the capacity that we have in terms of using the space in terms of useful space, because a lot of the space is obviously within a buffer where we can't build because of the existing railway. And just in comment of the district health unit, as I mentioned, even if the letter submitted and was at its current stage and I did not refute it, they still said that they had no objection with our proposal. So in that sense, you could even consider the letter as is, even without the information I refuted, because even in that current letter's form, they said that they had no objection with our proposal. We've been delayed significantly based on the fact that we wanted to be transparent with the public in terms of what we're building. As I mentioned, we could have rezoned as ag without any of this specifications and conducted business as usual. This was a preference from planning department so that we are receiving comments and addressing them accordingly. And I think we have addressed them as they come in, and I will continue to address them as even after this rezoning application is decided on. Therefore, I highly advocate for the approval of the rezoning application tonight.
Ms. Martin, could you just clarify the process? Because I don't think I have the same understanding. What, for this application to proceed, was this meeting necessary?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, it was. Under the Planning Act, we're required to hold one public meeting in regards to the application. If the question is more so related to the zoning of the property, the zoning is institutional. So there is a need for the rezoning to allow for the agricultural use. So that's what the rural exception zone is seeking to put on the property, with some requests for some setback reductions, and of course the increase in the building height. So based on the fact that the current zoning is institutional, it's necessitated to zone. However, the agricultural uses that are being proposed would be permitted as part of the agricultural zone. So if there was a property that already had that zoning on it, we wouldn't be having this same type of conversation unless there were considerations for exemptions to the bylaw from the zone provisions.
But to be clear, the current zoning is institutional, not agricultural?
That is correct. The institutional zoning is in relation to the fact that these lands were formerly part of the Kemptville campus property.
So they're not currently agricultural?
Sorry, I think, just to clarify, I think what he's trying to say is that had he applied for rezoning to go just to agricultural zone and not necessarily specify a specific crop, that could have gone through and he could have been farming industrial hemp just as a general agricultural use, and I think that's the distinction that he's trying to make. Sorry.
And the function then of this meeting, how would that agricultural use have been achieved if it's not through this process?
No, there would still have been a public meeting, there would have been a rezoning, but industrial hemp itself would not have come up at all because it's technically, it's treated as a general agricultural crop. So I think that when you hear industrial hemp, you get a different reaction than when you hear just a general type of crop. And I think that's what he's trying to,
Okay, better understood. Thank you. Okay. As you know, certainly from my perspective, just speaking as one member of council, just by virtue of the fact that we had a bit of a rough ride with an initial cannabis facility in the community, where in fact there was some suggestion that due diligence hadn't taken place and there wasn't enough conversation with the community or with council. I think again, I speak only for myself, I think there is a tendency, certainly as we move forward, to at least proceed in a way where we feel confident in our due diligence. So this meeting tonight is one opportunity to do that. I certainly myself feel that I could benefit from a little more information and dialogue. I think overall the merits of the application are strong. Again, I speak just as one member of council. As many of you know, we're welcoming the international plowing match in a matter of weeks. We're very enthusiastic about agricultural and the growth of the agricultural sector, or certainly I am, in North Grenville. That said, some of the particularities of the application are such that it would certainly, I feel it'd be a bit beneficial to me to take a little more time. The odor question is one where I am confused. I'm hearing that we can't regulate odor outdoors or indoors by virtue of being industrial hemp. Is that the case? Municipalities have no power. And I just want to ask the director that before we go to the applicant.
Thank you, Your Worship. In regards to cannabis, the matter of odor, it would fall under Health Canada's provisions. So that's from the perspective and in past consideration of another operation within the municipality, that's been the mechanism in which we've addressed odor concerns with those operations.
In the matter of cannabis, but you're saying for industrial hemp, there really is no concern?
So we currently
no mechanism?
There is no mechanism currently at the municipal level through, say, a bylaw in which we would regulate odors.
Okay. Perfect. So council colleagues, anything else? There's a recommendation, there's been a suggestion for deferral, so I can't move a motion, so I'll look to Councillor Barclay. And then Councillor Sullivan, please.
I've had second thoughts about moving for deferral, if that's what it requires, because I'm not sure what would happen between now and the date we'd see it come back to us. I think it's a very strong application, and I think Dr. Kosian and the applicant has addressed all the concerns that we might have. It's not a cannabis facility, doesn't have the same odor problems that we certainly had a rough ride with two previous operations. So I'm not inclined to be in favor of deferring.
Councillor Strachan?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I appreciate the thoroughness of your responses, and I appreciate the public for asking as many questions as they have. To say we've been once bitten, twice shy, I think the first time we were bitten, it was pretty hard. And so we've learned a lot from that process. And I think that where we're at right now in this discussion is light years ahead of where we were a few years ago when we first encountered, having a cannabis facility within our municipality and the issues that we dealt with there. And many of them were challenging, and perhaps some are still outstanding that we have challenges regulating. But your responses and the not simply opinion-based, also the scientific literature and the other places that you've referred to, I think satisfy my need to have thorough responses. And so the health unit, likewise, yes, they haven't provided another long or more exhaustive letter, but simply saying that they have no objections, I think satisfies those needs as well in my eyes. I don't see any need to defer at this stage because we have had this conversation, and I'm inclined to agree with Councillor Barclay that I'm not sure that anything would change between now and the next time it would come to us. Thank you.
Okay, so then, Council, again, I can't move a motion, so I'll look to one of you to move something should you wish to. Okay, so we have Councillor Sullivan moving acceptance of the application, and forgive me, I don't have the language, and that is that council approves the zoning bylaw amendment as presented this evening in terms of the shift from institutional to site-specific rural exception. Do I have a seconder? Okay. Councillor Barclay, so Councillor Sullivan and Councillor Barclay are moving and seconding. The motion is on the table. Any other comments or concerns, council? So my question is just in terms of the proposed drainage, the proposed lighting, and some of the other considerations that were mentioned this evening, proposed setbacks. At this point, and I look to you, Ms. Martin, how do those things ultimately get decided?
Thank you, Your Worship. As in, decided in where...
there's been suggestion of setbacks this evening. There's been suggestion of possible drainage types this evening. Are those things now entirely in the jurisdiction of the applicant, or does the planning department have some jurisdiction?
At this point, as the buildings are agriculture related, site plan control does not apply. However, the Ontario Building Code will in regards to the construction of any of the structures related to the agricultural use. So that would be dictated by the building code in regards to having to provide a grading and drainage plan with the buildings.
Okay. And you're saying Ontario Building Code as enforced by us, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Any other questions or concerns? Councillor Strachan?
Through you, Madam Mayor, to Director Martin, regarding the setback changes from 12 to 8 meters and whether or not that is a significant enough difference, is the other side of that where there's the setback requirement from the railroads set in stone that cannot be deviated from? Like, can the 4 meters be made up on the railroad side as opposed to the residential side, if that worked for that piece of land?
So my understanding of the setbacks in regards to agricultural structures is that they're not as regulated as in regards to like a residential structure. Our provisions within our zoning bylaw require 100-meter setback for residential structures, but there's no requirements in regards to the agricultural structures. So to that end, there could be some room to push back and meet the 12-meter setback without impacting the railway. But it is the request that what the applicant is seeking is that 8 meters versus the.
The 30 meters came from, I believe, CN Rail for residential? Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think the 30-meter setback is important in a sense that, like, when you get closer and closer to rail, you have, like, rumbling and obviously the sound and everything. So, I mean, the preference is not to alter the setbacks in the proposal, but willing to consider if it makes a very significant difference on enjoyment of property.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, if I may continue, I just suggest that the power of being a better good neighbor, I think goes a long way. And so if there's a consideration, I would just say that if that's a possibility that and it works within your current planning, then
Sure.
you know, maybe just give it some due consideration.
I'm willing to consider it, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
It's just for the greenhouses.
The other thing that was mentioned was the height of the building.
I will clarify on that. We were trying to make sure we covered off any option. The actual permitted height, if you were building like a dwelling or something like that, is actually 11 or 13 meters, if one of the planners wants to correct me. And there's also an exception in your bylaw that means that none of the required maximum heights actually apply to agricultural buildings. So even without that site-specific exception, an agricultural building could exceed the maximum. And what we had included, the varying the 6 meters, was for an accessory building, because that's the way it's written in your bylaw. The maximum permitted height is only for a residential dwelling, and it refers everything else to the accessory section.
Okay, perfect. Just one last question. In terms of signage for turtles, I don't think yes, she is. Maybe our Public Works Director can speak to, I don't think signage resolves issues around vulnerability of turtles, but perhaps you can speak to whether or not Bedell has been evaluated, just given some of the habitat that residents have recognized or noticed on that road in particular.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Although it doesn't relate to this specific planning function, yes, the Environmental Advisory Action Committee do have a budgetary allotment through the Public Works Department. We're currently working through some mapping, and I have added Bedell Road as we sit here as one of the possible locations.
Okay, thank you. And possible locations, what's the difference between possible and actual location?
One of the experts, and I am using that term, that sit on the committee, are providing some wetland and mapping and habitat locations, which will be the priority setting for this individual signage placements. And we will utilize the full budgetary allotment to put as many turtle crossing signs in areas of significance that we possibly can.
Okay. Okay. I think I've exhausted my list. Councillor Barclay?
Just to further complicate things, maybe I wondered if Councillor O'Sullivan would entertain a friendly amendment to what she moved. And just picking up on what Councillor Strachan was asking about, and what I interpret as a bit of flexibility, whether we could approve the application save for the setback along the south end of the property, which is closest to the residential units. No, I'm getting a...
I think Mr. Dyke is going to get
Yes,
in here.
okay.
Sorry, Your Worship. I think with respect, because of the setback requirement is actually within the zoning bylaw itself, so if you don't approve that with the zoning bylaw tonight, you're going to have to come back and change it later. Director Martin can correct me on that. It's been a long time since I got involved in planning matters, but I would just throw that out there with respect to how it affects the application if it's part of the special zone.
Could we just alter the setback this evening if there's consensus?
Can I also respond? Like, this is just a plan. Like, we don't want to build to the road either. This is just to allow flexibility if we want to expand in the future. So we will obviously build far away, like closer to the, I don't know if you could put the plan up, but our agricultural research center is much further on the property, and the greenhouses are going to be next to that. So just because the zoning, we're trying to be as thorough with our zoning application, so we don't have to come back and say, oh, by the way, now, yeah, to the Committee of Adjustments, just like the gentleman earlier today, to say, oh, we have to amend, a few meters to allow for this greenhouse, but certainly that is not within the immediate plans, probably not within the next couple of years even. So this is just to be thorough in general, so that we don't have to come back in the future, just to add some clarification on that point.
I'm not sure that quite resolves the issue. So Councillor Barclay, Councillor Sullivan, what were you seeking with the amendment?
Just to deny them that setback on the south end of the property.
Okay. So Ms. Martin, I'll go to you. Is it possible that the motion could specify the rezoning without the setback then? Or the variance to the setback?
Thank you, Your Worship. So the zone standard is 12 meters in the rural zone. So you would still need to amend the way that the bylaw is structured and reads. It recognizes that 8-meter setback. So you would have to amend the exception zone that's being presented tonight to be 12 meters for that property line.
Okay, so again, this is a motion of council. So council, do you want to modify the stated setback in the motion? Councillor Sullivan?
Thank you. So just a quick question. So the blue building is the warehouse, right?
The blue is
Oh, it's the
outdoor field.
Outdoor cultivation, right?
The green is
are
greenhouses.
the warehouses, and the orange one is the, or the
Warehouse.
green are greenhouses, and the orange
Yes.
one is the warehouse.
Yeah.
So the warehouse is back further. So is it only the one greenhouse? that
Correct.
It's only the one greenhouse?
Right, yes.
So is it possible that you could just turn that one greenhouse going the other
We
direction
can move
and fit it there?
we can move it somewhere else, yes.
Okay, so we could keep the 12-meter setback and,
I have no issue with
Happy
going back to the
neighbors?
12-meter setback. Yeah.
okay, then but is that going to really complicate the motion?
No, I don't.
To stay with the
I think it's the
12-meter
will of
setback?
council to
Okay.
address this matter in the way it sees fit. Yeah. So Amy, I understand that the motion stipulates or connects not just the rezoning, but provisions related to building height and setbacks, and to extend the period of time for which shipping containers can be stored. So there's 3 other provisions in there attached to this motion. So Councilors Barclay and O'Sullivan, who
Yeah, I'm
moved and
su-
seconded the motion.
Yeah.
Do you stand by all other caveats here, except for setbacks?
Yes.
do.
Yeah, that's what I'm suggesting in my friendly amendment
Okay.
to
So
Councillor
then-
O'Sullivan's.
One reverts back to 12 meters, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So Amy, that's been well captured, well understood?
Yes, Your Worship.
Okay.
And sorry, just to clarify, it's only the exterior side yard that we're along Bedell?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, because that's the one that's closer to the residences, right?
Yeah.
And it already has a treed buffer, right, anyway?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it does.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else, council colleagues? Okay. Okay, so the motion has been advanced with a minor adjustment or major, all depending on your perspective. And I'll call the question on the motion. All in favor? Okay, it passes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we're going to resume this evening. Thank you for your patience. We have another public meeting, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right? Justin, could I get the script for that, please? We're moving on to another application in regards to 4353 Rideau River Road. Council will now hold a virtual public meeting to consider an application to amend the zoning on the lands located at 4353 River Road. I must advise you that this meeting is your opportunity to voice any objections or concerns. If an appellant does not provide oral comments at this public meeting or written submissions, the local planning appeal tribunal may refuse to consider objections. Any persons who wish further notice of council's decision concerning the matter should give their name and address to Ms. Martin, who's here this evening. Of course, if you wish to make public comment, you can do so once we're in that portion of the meeting. And are there people here for the meeting this evening? For the rezoning application, is there anyone in the room for this? Okay, thank you. So we're going to move, we'll invite Ms. Martin to present the application, or the recommendation, rather.
Thank you, Your Worship. We'll just move to the next slide, please. So our second application being considered tonight is for a rezoning amendment for the property, as I will describe as south adjacent to 4353 Rideau River Road. And there is no civic address for the property, so that's the best descriptor that I can provide to help locate it. I will say there is a typo. It is not 4.8 acres. It's a just over 12 acre property. The current land use of the property is agriculture, so it is a hayfield. Surrounding land uses include rural residential and agriculture, as well as there is a marina located across the road on the Rideau River. Next slide, please. So the property is designated as rural on the Schedule A of the United Counties Official Plan, as well as floodplain on Schedule D, which is the natural hazards and man-made hazards layer mapping for the county's official plan. North Granville's official plan designates the property as floodplain hazard, and our comprehensive zoning bylaw zones the property as flooding, erosion, and protection zone. And if we can go to the next slide, please. So here's the location of the property on Rideau River Road. As you can see, it's hard to gauge size of properties, but it's just over 12 acres in size. And we'll go to the next slide, where it will show the proposed development on the property. So the applicant is proposing to build a hay storage structure on the property. It would be the only structure that would be located on the property, and it would be set back from the roadway. Next slide, please. So in consideration of the planning application, staff have reviewed planning policy and in regards to whether or not the proposed development would conform to said policies. So in regards to the planning, our planning policy for the provincial policy statement, section 3.1.2 states that development and site alteration shall not be permitted within areas that would be rendered inaccessible to people and vehicles during times of flood hazards, as well as floodways, regardless of whether the area or inundation contains high points of land not subject to flooding. So what staff will point out here is that through the Conservation Authority, it has been determined that there is safe access at the roadway. However, it cannot be determined as to whether safe access is provided on the property down through to the structure. So it is our opinion that based on this policy from the provincial policy statement, that the proposed development does not conform to this policy. Next slide, please. So the next two points speak to the two flood zone concept as established in the provincial policy statement. North Granville uses a one zone flood concept for the floodplain. Therefore, the policies would not apply in this case. I did want to point them out because they were mentioned in the planning rationale and are contained and do provide some additional provisions for development in the floodplain, but only where that two-zone concept is provided. Next slide, please. And I want to note this is just section 3.1.7, which was provided on the previous slide. Just split it up a little more. But again, the two-zone concept does not apply. Next slide, please. So in regards to the county official plan, so the property is designated rural, and the rural land use policies state that it is the objective of the rural lands to protect and promote agricultural uses, agriculture-related uses, on-farm diversified uses, and normal farm practices. And section 3.3.2 also establishes and permits on rural lands agricultural uses, very similar to what was listed above in the previous policy. So it is staff's opinion that this proposed development would be supported by the rural land use designation policies of the county official plan. And if we go to the next slide, some more policy from the county official plan, very similar to the provincial policy statement in regards to development within natural hazards. So it is a policy that development shall be directed away from areas of natural hazards, including flooding hazards. So development of such areas will only be considered in accordance with the policies of this plan and in consultation with the appropriate conservation authority. Staff do note that the applicant was successful in getting a Section 28 permit under the Conservation Authorities Act, and I will speak to that a little later within the presentation. Next slide, please. So again, more policy in regards to floodplain development. So development and site alteration will not be permitted within a floodway, regardless of whether the area of inundation contains high points of land not subject to flooding. So again, being consistent with the provincial policy statement, it's staff's opinion that the proposed development would not meet this provision of the county official plan. Next slide, please. And then similar to the provincial policy statement, the policy is essentially restated within the official plan in regards to what development can occur. And again, it's staff's opinion that this would not meet the intent of the county official plan. Next slide, please. In regards to our own municipal official plan for the floodplain hazard policies, it is the objective to minimize the possibility of property damage, to direct development to areas outside of hazard lands adjacent to rivers and watercourses which are impacted by flooding hazards, as well as to define and regulate natural hazards. And that's, and again, in accordance with the Conservation Authorities Act. If we go to the next slide, please. And I want to point out, in regards to policy 5.2.2.a of our official plan, our policy does allow for minor agricultural facilities, although there is no definition for what could be considered minor. However, there are a list of some requirements in that there can be no residential occupancy, the building is not for continuous livestock management or habitation, and pollution risks or hazards are appropriately addressed. So again, this is a hay storage facility, and it's staff's opinion that the proposed development could meet this definition within the official plan and would conform to our official plan policy. Next slide, please. So the zoning currently does not permit buildings, but it does allow for an agricultural use on the property, excluding that building use. So the applicant has applied for a zoning amendment seeking the exception in regards to the zoning provisions that we would allow for a single building for agricultural storage, being hay storage, on the property. Next slide, please. In regards to the Section 28 development permit, this is a permit that is required for any development within the regulatory area of a conservation authority. So the floodplain does constitute part of the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority's permitting area. So the rules and criteria that are established for the Section 28 permits, they are not the same as required under the Planning Act, including the zoning bylaw amendment being considered for this evening. There is no consideration as part of the Section 28 permit as to whether or not the proposed development is a permitted use within a municipality zoning bylaw. So that's how the permit was able to be issued, as there are provisions under the Conservation Authorities Act regulations that do allow for the construction of certain types of agricultural facilities within the floodplain. And I just want to state that while the standards and criteria established under the Conservation Authorities Act would permit the agriculture structure, it's the same criteria is not used for livestock within a floodway or floodplain, and it would not preclude the municipal zoning bylaw. So the trigger at this point has been that when the application comes in for a building permit, it would not be able to meet the zoning standards, and the amendment would be required. Next slide, please. So the municipality has received an agency letter from the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority with their review of relevant planning policies. The letter was provided as part of our planning report to council. The RVCA noted that the proposed development did not meet various aspects of the provincial policy statement and the United Counties official plan, but does acknowledge that our official plan does allow for minor agricultural facilities, but deferred to the municipality on how we chose to define minor. I would also like to note that the applicant today has submitted, prior to the meeting, letters of support from surrounding neighbors and residents within the community for his proposed development project. Next slide, please. We'll just go advance one more. So it's based on the review of the development application against the provincial policy statement, the United Counties official plan, and our own municipal official plan. It is staff's recommendation that the proposed zoning amendment cannot be supported because it cannot meet all elements of our planning policy. That concludes my formal presentation. I do note that the agent on file is here, Mr. Clark, as well as the property owner, to address any questions that council may have about the proposed development on the property.
So, Council, any questions for Ms. Martin at this stage? Councilor Barclay?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Martin. This is complicated material to wade through, but if I can boil it down, the crux of the matter is that we have different rules and criteria of the Conservation Authority permits versus the Planning Act application. So we have two sets of rules and regulations that don't work well together. Would that be fair?
Through your worship to Councillor Barclay, that is correct. There are two different pieces of legislation that do not speak to each other in certain ways, including the fact that there are permissions for agricultural structures, but it doesn't recognize or provide the requirement that zoning confirmation be provided. So that's where the Planning Act criteria and the policy that I have to adhere under the Planning Act would not be the same criteria that they're using when issuing a development permit under the Conservation Authorities Act.
But ultimately, the decision rests with council as far as this goes. Okay, thanks.
What is the risk of a storage facility for hay on a large farm? I understand it's floodplain. I understand that policies don't talk to each other. I understand that it's incumbent upon you as a director of planning to assure adherence with our policies, but to distill this conversation down to the bare minimum, what risk does this pose?
Thank you, Your Worship. I can't really say I'm qualified to comment on the level of risk associated with the structure within the floodplain, but certainly any structure within the floodplain does run a certain element of risk in regards to property damage during a major flooding event. Concerns would be for, certainly certain facilities, should they have livestock, obviously you don't want livestock in the floodplain when there's a major flooding event because there's a direct risk there. But it's, what could be stored within the building as well. So you want to make sure that there's no hazardous materials that could, in the event of a floodplain, enter the waterway. But the concern and my understanding based on what's been provided from the applicant as well as his agent is that floodproofing standards in accordance with the Conservation Authority will be implemented to address any major flooding events that may happen to reduce the impact of that flood event on that structure.
And does hay represent, if the stated purpose of the facility is the storage of hay, does hay represent a risk or a danger when it comes to floodplain?
Not really sure how to answer that question. It would, certainly it would have the potential, if there is a flood, to be caught up in the floodwaters. As to what that impact could be, I'm not qualified to give an answer on that.
But wouldn't that be true if it's hay that's being grown on the farm itself? Wouldn't that be equally a risk?
In regards to any kind of movement, no, because the hay is planted in the ground. This will be for the storage of hay bales, which have been bundled to be taken off the property for other uses.
So it's the size of the object or how it's stored that becomes the issue?
So any concern with any kind of development in the floodplain could be for the ability for there to be any type of object to become I guess, mobile in the event of a flooding event. So it would not stay in place.
Okay. So I know the applicant, and I think the applicant's representative is here. I'll go to Councillor Sullivan. I'll look for any other hands, and then we'll go to the applicant.
Okay, thank you, through you, Your Worship, to Director Martin. So when I also question the risk to the municipality. So if we, council takes it on ourselves to approve this, then he builds this structure to store hay. And if there, in the event that there is a major flooding and he loses the building and all of the contents, like all of his hay, and if he doesn't have insurance that would cover it because it's being built in a floodplain, are we liable then if he comes back or the insurance company says, you gave him permission to build it here, so you replace it? That's my concern about the risk to the municipality.
Ms. Martin, can you answer that?
I thank you, Your Worship. I'm not qualified at this time to provide an answer in regards to insurance and municipal liability through the zoning approval. I would have to get a legal opinion on that matter.
But certainly municipalities consider the risk all the time. Mr. Dyke, do you have a comment on whether or not by approving an egg-related structure, the municipality automatically becomes liable for the fate of the building in the event of a flood?
Similar to Ms. Martin's comment, I mean, you're asking for a legal opinion, which I can't give you.
Right.
There is inherent risk in when council makes a decision against one of its policies or it varies one of its policies, but to the magnitude of that risk, I can't speak to that.
Okay. Councillor Strachan?
I think this may be directed towards Director Martin. I'm just going to make the comment. Thank you, Madam Mayor. The risk of hay, per se, and what could get into the waterways, I don't think is in question. I don't think that there's anything inherently dangerous about wet hay. However, I think that there is nothing that is required for permission to have vehicles of, farming vehicles on the property and so on. And I think that there's probably a greater risk to, any waterway damage, oils or anything like that getting into the waterways there. And then that's not being questioned right now. So I'm not sure that I see where the risk is going in this conversation. I understand the explanation that you provided and the different regulations and policies and so on. However, I'm not sure that the risk as far as the environmental risk, as far as that goes, is related to the hay per se, and the structure seems to be relatively benign, notwithstanding the various policies not allowing it. Thank you.
So if there are no other questions, why don't we hear from the applicant or his representative?
Well, I have something to note on the hay. If
Great.
we don't build a building, it's going to be stored outside, which is not an option because we sell the hay for horse hay and other people. It can't be outside. But the building is going to be closed all four sides and the roof. So in that aspect, the hay cannot go anywhere. It's going to be in the building. I've lived there 27 years on the road on the adjacent property, 4363 Rideau River Road, and that property has never been wet since I've lived there. I can drive my car around in the springtime in the field there. So
to that end, do you, or is it Mr., I'm so sorry. Mr. Clark, do you have a presentation or supplemental comments to make at this time?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think at this point, the main consideration we need to look at here is the policies are very specific about risk and what's associated with this. And we're not proposing human habitation. We're not even proposing livestock management of any kind. There won't be any sort of risk to any living creatures or people related to this operation. As Mr. Wiebel mentioned, the sides will be enclosed. If the property were to flood, I imagine these hay bales are tied, so it's not like the flood waters are just going to wash everything away necessarily. The whole issue of safe access was brought up, and it is clear that we haven't shown on site that safe access is possible, but we can definitely do that if that's a concern with council and staff. So I think really we need to look at the risk associated here, and honestly, it's very minor. This facility will help the applicant manage his fields more efficiently, and it would actually be less of a danger storing it inside, as he said, than storing it outside. So I think there are some conflicting policies at play, but the main point here is the county official plan does permit these type of things to be located within the floodplain. So I think, you know, overall, it's appropriate for this property. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Barclay and Councillor Strachan, please.
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor, to the applicant. I believe I read that it's being constructed on a concrete base, and the base itself it mitigates any kind of erosion given flood. Is it 6 inches worth, or can you just clarify the foundation of the building?
Yeah, correct. It will be a 6-inch concrete base, and it will be flood-proofed as per the requirements of the Conservation Authority. So the building will be above the flood elevation, for sure. It's just, you know, I guess the access driveway getting to it, whether that's above the flood elevation or not, is what's in question. But correct, it would be a 6-inch concrete base.
Councillor Strachan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The current access road that would lead up to that structure, what is it constructive of right now? It's in place, correct?
It is in place and it's gravel. You could drive your car up it.
Yeah, I think I'm familiar with what property that is. I drive past it frequently, and I think I understand what you're talking about. So I guess the question would be there for safe access would be whether or not it's high enough. Should there be too much water?
The lane is almost equivalent to Rideau River Road.
Yeah.
So if you can't drive up Rideau River Road, then you won't be able to drive up my lane.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments or concerns in regard to the applicant? Okay. So we do have some, I think, others coming to speak. So you would like to speak? Okay, great. Welcome. If you don't mind shifting, we only have one mic. I apologize. Just stay close to the mic. Thanks, Mark. Go ahead. Welcome. And if you could just state your name.
Yep. Good evening, councilors, mayor, directors. Brett Ramsey. My wife and I own Pirate Cove Marina, adjacent property to Mr. Weebles. And there's been some concern about flooding. We've owned the marina for just over 28 years, and I have never seen flooding that would ever get to his property. And as he just stated, if it got to his property and flooding was a concern, well, you aren't driving down Rideau River Road either. So the fact that there's issues in the building bylaws and the county bylaws that in the Rideau Valley Conservation that are conflicting of whether he can or cannot build doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think this gentleman should be well allowed to build a hay storage facility on his property to store hay for horse people. Being a farmer myself, I understand how important hay is to livestock and animals, and dry hay is way better to feed your horses and cattle than wet, moldy hay. So to get it out of the weather, I think this gentleman should be allowed to do such, and you guys would like you to consider that, allowing him to do it for those reasons, for growth in our community as well. So thank you very much for your time, and everybody have a great evening.
Thank you, Mr. Ramsey. Anyone else wishing to speak to the application? Okay. Anything else you would like to add at this stage?
I don't think so at this time, thanks.
Okay. So council colleagues, as you know, I can't move a motion. I'm partial to supporting the application myself for the stated reasons. I understand, of course, the position Ms. Martin is in, and from time to time we do deviate from staff policy. So I certainly will myself be supporting the application, but look to a motion for council, and it's the will of council to go one way or another. Councilor Strachan? And you are moving?
I'm moving in support of the
Okay.
application.
A seconder, please. Do we have one?
In support of the application, not the recommendation. Yes, yeah. Yes.
So maybe what I can do to be perfectly process-driven, is currently the recommendation is that we not approve. I'm hearing Councillor Strakian say she will move that council approve bylaw 6322, permitting an ag structure as a permitted use within the flooding erosion protection zone for concession 9, part of lot 9, geographic township of South Gordon, now the municipality of North Grenville. So do I have a seconder then? Okay. Just take whoever you want. And then in terms of the stated purpose of hay, is that a stipulation of the rezoning? So the ag building is the permitted use, is that correct? Ms. Martin, is there anything else you would like to add at this stage?
Not at your time, Your Worship. I just will note that staff did prepare a zoning bylaw amendment as requested in the event that council would like to consider support of the application.
Okay, many thanks. If there's no further comment, I will call the question. Any further comments? None? Okay, all in favor? Okay, thank you. That carries. Thanks for your efforts. I do have to close the public meeting. I apologize. The meeting is closed. Thank you for those who were here this evening. Appreciate it. Okay. And to be clear, that motion was in favor of the egg use, right? That's how we went on that? Okay. Okay. Okay, so we're going to move on. We have a plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment in regards to Water Street, County Road 18. And I believe this is also a public meeting, Jess? You can refresh my memory on that? Okay. Do I? I'm not sure that I do. I have the two previous ones. I'm not sure I have that one. Oh, thank you. Yes, that's it. Okay. So, council will now hold a virtual public meeting to consider an application to amend the zoning on the lands located at County Road 18 and Water Street in Oxford Mills from flooding and erosion protection to flooding in regards to the plan of subdivision zoning bylaw amendment, Water Street, County Road 18. This meeting is your opportunity to voice any objections or concerns you may have with respect to the proposed zoning bylaw. If an appellant does not provide oral comments at this public meeting or written submissions before council adopts the amendment, the local planning appeal tribunal may refuse to consider any objections. Any persons who wish further notice of the council's decision concerning this matter should address themselves to Ms. Martin. Anyone wishing to ask a question during the public meeting can do so. Is there anyone here for this public meeting? We're now just 3 people standing remaining. All right. So I'll pass it over to Ms. Martin before we go to the applicant.
Thank you, Your Worship. We'll just move to the next slide, please. So tonight, council is considering to hear comments in regards to the proposed plan of subdivision at County Road 18 and Water Street in Oxford Mills, as well as entertaining a zoning bylaw amendment which would rezone the lands from rural to residential first density. So the property is located within Oxford Mills. It's on the north side of the creek, as indicated on the attached or the provided map with the star. Next slide, please. As you can see in the attached aerial photograph, the property is largely used for an agricultural field currently. There is some vegetation and windrows along the creek and that bisect the property. Next slide, please. The zoning of the property is rural, and there is floodplain located along the creek as demonstrated in the hatched area. The property is also located within the regulatory area of the creek for the Conservation Authority. Next slide, please. So the proposed plan of subdivision would create 7 lots, 6 fronting onto County Road 18 and 1 fronting onto Water Street. The lands are designated hamlet and floodplain hazards on Schedule A of our North Granville official plan. As mentioned, a zoning bylaw amendment is also being sought and considered to rezone the lands from rural to residential first density. And it should be noted that many of the residential properties within the hamlet of Oxford Mills are zoned residential first density, and there are specific standards for properties that are on private servicing. So the purpose of our meeting this evening is to receive comments from the public and members of council. The comments received at the public meeting will be considered by municipal staff and will be provided to the counties of Leeds and Grenville for their consideration. And just as a reminder, the United Counties are the approval authority when it comes to plans of subdivisions, and the municipality, at a later meeting, staff will be bringing recommended draft conditions to be forwarded on to the counties in regards to the application. Next slide, please. So the proposed draft plan of subdivision is provided. As you can see, there are 6 lots that front onto County Road 18 and 1 that has access off of Water Street. The intent based on the current draft plan shows the lots extending down to the creek. However, staff have mentioned to the agent on file that we'd like to have some consideration for the floodplain lands being put into municipal ownership as a means of providing a passive park and additional access to the creek at this location. It is noted that this area is gently sloping towards the creek and could potentially provide opportunity for waterfront access in a passive park. Next slide, please. Staff have evaluated the application against planning policy, so it is a policy of our rural lands under the provincial policy statement to permit residential development, including lot creation where locally appropriate. So it is our opinion that the proposed plan of subdivision is located within a rural settlement area, and the land use designation permits a plan of subdivision with a density that blends into the character of the rural lands. Next slide, please. In regards to the United Counties official plan for rural settlement areas, provides that these areas may continue to experience growth through infilling and development of vacant lands by way of consent or plan of subdivision as appropriate. Next slide, please. Our own current official plan has supportive policies in regards to residential development within the hamlet areas. So I'm not going to go into detail in regards to the hamlet area provisions, but I did want to touch on some additional provisions within the official plan. So at the end of 2021, the municipality amended our affordable housing provisions, where we endeavor to have across the municipality at a minimum and on an annual basis 25% of all new residential development affordable, and residential development applications will be evaluated utilizing, among other factors, this affordable housing percentage metric. So staff note that the planning rationale identifies the limitations of the development in supporting affordable housings in regards to lack of local amenities in Oxford Mills, lack of public transit, and the fact that the proposed development will be built on private servicing, but it does acknowledge the opportunity to support further unit creation through additional residential units. Further, staff provide that 25% of 7 units is 1.75 units, so 2 units could be provided to meet the 25% threshold established within the official plan. Next slide, please. Other policies within the official plan include cultural heritage and archaeological resources. So in accordance with section 12.7 of our official plan, we have to evaluate for areas of archaeological potential, and an archaeological assessment was provided, which determined that no further assessment was required. So it didn't find any archaeological resources on the property. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, staff have raised through our comments on the initial submission to the developer and his agent that there is interest in having the floodplain hazard lands provided into municipal ownership in regards to the ability of being able to provide waterfront access and a passive recreation area. Section 6.4a states public ownership may be considered where public access for recreational uses is desirable. This also aligns with our park and recreation master plan, which encourages natural and passive parks and waterfront access where appropriate. So I do want to note to council that this is something that has been discussed with the agent on file, and further discussion will continue, and recommendations will be brought forth at the draft plan condition stage. Next slide, please. As mentioned, the applicant has filed an application for a zoning bylaw amendment to put the lands from the rural zone to the residential first density zone. It's not anticipated that any special exceptions are required to accommodate the development of the lots for the residential uses, and I provided the zoning standards on the screen and within the planning report. I do want to note that after discussion with the planning agent, it's been recommended that we defer the decision on the zoning amendment until such a time that we've had some further consideration as to the floodplain hazard lands and what that's ownership of that will look like. So staff are supportive of the deferral to allow for a little more conversation around that piece in the event that there is any need to modify or create any special exceptions within the first residential first density zone. Next slide, please. I want to note that we have received public comment through the counties as well as on the zoning application from a neighbor who abuts, unbelievable, they're within the area. They have concerns over the needing to bring in fill to raise the grade of the lot coming in off of Water Street, and the impact that that would have on the creek. They raised affordable housing as a concern. A request was made for, how are we going to deal with construction completion, ensuring that construction of the subdivision is done within a timely manner and doesn't drag on for multiple years. And a request was provided to have one of the properties provided as parquet. We also received a comment after the publishing of the report and the presentation from Mr. Cannon, who is encouraging council to consider two of those units should be required, or two of the lots should be required to have an additional residential unit as a way of satisfying the affordable housing policies of the municipality, and that this should be considered as a draft condition. Next slide, please. I do note that the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority and the Health Unit have provided their comments to the applicant agent on file, as well as the United Counties, and their comments are being addressed through that process in regards to the plan of subdivision. Next slide, please. So that ends the formal part of my presentation. I do note that the Mr. Pence, the planner on file, as well as the applicant are here to answer any questions in regards to the development.
Any questions in regards to Amy's presentation? Councilor Charkian?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. To Director Martin, with respect to any future residential units built on that property, are they required to be outside of the floodplain?
Through your worship, yes. So no development would be, especially residential development, would be permitted within the floodplain. It would have to be entirely outside of that area.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Councilor Barclay?
So the applicant has suggested that this, the zoning bylaw amendment be deferred, but still go forward with the plan of subdivision. They're related, aren't they? So is the applicant, to your knowledge, asking for both to be deferred?
Ms. Martin?
Through your worship, so the decision on the public meeting in regards to the plan of subdivision, no decisions being made this evening. It's to hear comments from members of the public and council in regards to the proposed application. Staff take the comments and will provide them to the United Counties, but a separate report and recommendation will be coming with draft condition recommendations to the counties at a later date. So the approval on the subdivision is really not the municipalities, as it's the county who is the approval authority, and we do provide agency comments. But we do have the ability to approve or not zoning bylaw amendments to our zoning bylaw.
Go ahead.
Great. Well, so that prompts a couple of questions. I would support our desire to see the floodplain area become the property of the municipality as a passive park. I note from the plan that would impact lot number 1, which is the property coming off of Water Street. And I note that there is a concern from a resident as far as the fill having to go in, et cetera. So if we were to go forward with a request to have the floodplain deeded to the municipality, would that eliminate lot 1, or it would cause some problems with lot 1? Perhaps we could have that map up just so people can see what I'm talking about. Yeah, so lot 1 is the bottom right, and I see the floodplain basically cuts it in half or diminishes it by 2/3.
Through your worship to Councillor Barkley, so the access wouldn't change. They would still have that frontage. In regards to lot coverage and the buildable area, that always has had to be outside of the floodplain. So, the consideration for the municipality taking the floodplain lands, it wouldn't impact lot 1 because the zoning standard could still be met, but maybe perhaps the applicant and Mr. Pence could provide, if they're able to, what that lot area would be outside of the floodplain for lot 1.
Just an additional question, if I might, Madam Mayor. Yeah. So additional, we're looking for all developers to, take into consideration our desire to see affordable housing. So an additional unit could be a basement, a fully finished basement apartment?
Through your worship, yes, that is correct. We do have provisions that would also allow for an additional residential unit to be located in an accessory structure as well. And the municipal staff have provided comment through our agency letter to the counties that we'd like to see some consideration within the hydrogeological study and terrain analysis to determine how many units could be supported within the development as a way of making it more ready in the future for any other one of those 7 lots who may want to put an additional residential unit to not have to go back and amend that study to determine if it could be supported. So it's something, it's an approach that we're taking with all rural development, given the limitations of private servicing and the nitrate loading that has to be considered. But overall, they could have up to potentially 2 additional residential units per property as per our policies.
Great, thank you.
So the stipulation around the number of affordable units, secondary suites, right, is one that we would make to the counties? Is it subject to their approval?
Thank you, Your Worship. So the provision would have to be a draft condition through the municipality to the United Counties. Certainly the United Counties could provide their own draft condition in regards to affordable housing, as they do have their own metrics within their official plan.
But the current proposal, as I understand it, is to make 2 secondary units the draft condition, not 1?
So based on the current submission, the planning rationale highlights that there is a potential to support the additional residential unit, but it didn't go so as far as to commit that two of those lots would provide the additional residential unit at the initial construction phase. So the possibility is there for any of the lots to have an additional residential unit down the road, but staff did not note in the planning rationale that there was a firm commitment as to which lots would, in fact, at the construction stage, include an additional residential unit.
So to be clear, are we allowing for the possibility, but we're not stipulating it?
Thank you, Your Worship. So certainly we could provide a stipulation within the draft conditions, but our policy is permissive overall. So you could have a requirement for that 25% for 2 units to be an additional residential unit on the property, but you could get full 100% of the lots to provide, should that be the desire of the person purchasing the property, to include an additional residential unit, or you could have 1 lot that has up to 2. So we do have that permissive stipulation, but we do have the ability through draft conditions to provide some requirement in regards to our policy.
So indeed, so my understanding is we have a affordable housing policy and we have objectives, and through draft conditions we would stipulate 2 secondary suite units to increase housing diversity throughout the municipality. It's just 2. I recognize it's not a lot, but it seems valuable to me. So I apologize. I may not be understanding you as we're on our 3rd public meeting, but am I to discern from what you're saying that we will stipulate a minimum of 2? Maybe that's the better way to ask the question.
Certainly staff can provide a draft condition in regards to the affordable housing component in regards to additional residential units, and it's something that we will certainly continue to discuss with the developer ahead of us bringing draft conditions forward to council.
And are those draft conditions on the table tonight as part of our deliberations when we send our recommendations to the council, to the county council?
No, Your Worship, the point of tonight's meeting is to hear public comments, so no draft
Only.
conditions have been presented to council as of yet.
Okay, so that would come back when we're ready to do that, is that correct?
That is correct, and staff will provide a fulsome presentation on the draft conditions to council.
I see, okay, thank you, I appreciate that. Okay, colleagues, anything else before we invite the applicants forward? Okay, applicants, is there, or applicant, and representatives, is there anything you'd like to add?
Good evening. My name is Steve Pence. I'm a planning consultant from Novatech, and I've attended before yourselves in the past, before COVID. In fact, I think it was the last time I was here, so I'm happy to be back in person to meet with everybody. We filed the application on behalf of the property owner who's with me here tonight. And I guess we're satisfied with the contents of the planning report presented by your Director of Planning. And I'm here just tonight to answer any questions you might have. I would say that we're in receipt of all the comments that have been received to date from different technical agencies, as well as from the county and from the municipality. And we've reviewed those comments and are currently underway with addressing those comments in a way that responds to affordable housing, as well as to things like the floodplain dedication that has been suggested as an important element to what the municipality would like to see. So for that reason, I've asked that the zoning bylaw amendment just be deferred until we can resolve that floodplain issue. There may be a potential to revise the floodplain in a way that we can also address affordable housing. So I'd like to just kind of hold that off until we can resolve those two issues. I look at public meetings as an opportunity to hear from the public. Like I say, we're well aware of all the technical comments that have been received to date, and we're working on addressing those. But I don't see many public here tonight with any interest, so that kind of makes that job a little bit easier for us. But we'll come back and work with staff on the draft conditions to ensure that we've addressed everything, and I think I'll just stay here to remain available for questions if you have anything.
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor, excuse me, to Mr. Pence. You mentioned that there is no public here, but in the presentation, Director Martin mentioned some comments from the community and in particular one email. Are you saying you're not in possession of those comments?
In fact, there was one set of public comments that I was aware of that was received through the circulation. And in fact, I'm aware that the county planner had responded to those comments, and I further responded to those as well. So we have had some input in responding to that individual's comments initially. They're not here tonight. I think their comments have been, in my mind, adequately addressed. One of them was with respect to the number of entrances onto the county road. As part of our application, we had submitted a sightline analysis that the county had requested, and that sightline analysis spoke specifically to the entrances that face onto the county road and confirmed that there were no sightline concerns and safety concerns as a result of those several entrances. That report was subsequently reviewed by the county roads department, and they've accepted those findings. So in my mind, we've adequately addressed that technical concern. I think some of the other comments that were made were with respect to a bit of open space or a parkette on the lands. That's consistent with what the municipality has told us in terms of wanting some land for passive park and open space. So we're actively working on addressing that. So we'll be talking with Director Martin further. I think if I can't remember some of the other comments, maybe if you could remind me and I can just briefly touch on those as well.
Just ask a question.
Sure.
Why, so I also received the comment from a resident in regards to the number of entrances, exits, I guess, onto the county road itself and the possibility of internal subdivision roads. What do you think that concern signifies, and why was it not considered?
Well, I guess there's a couple things with that. The subject lands aren't suitably sized to accommodate a internal subdivision street. The floodplain takes up a good portion of the property, and what's left over wouldn't be enough to accommodate an internal street and still provide a lot yield that would make sense. So we considered that initially. Didn't make sense, so then we looked at the possibility of just doing some severances, but the official plan prohibits that many severances being done, so we had no choice but to go to a plan of subdivision route. And so in doing so, we've developed a concept that complies with the zoning for within a hamlet, and so the subdivision actually works quite well. It does provide for 6 entrances directly onto the county road, but like I say, we've addressed that through a study that supports the 6 entrances right directly onto the street.
Do you expect that cars would be backing in and backing out? I think there's a visibility issue.
These are more akin to larger rural lots.
Right.
I don't want to call the word.
So longer driveways.
Yeah, longer driveways, so
Okay.
individuals would drive in and drive out.
Some
rather
capacity to turn around in your driveways.
Yeah, even though it's within the settlement area of Oxford Mills, I still kind of think of it as a rural subdivision.
Okay.
So it would be typical that they drive in and drive out.
Okay. Ms. Martin, is there anything else you wanted to bring to our attention in terms of comments?
Not at this time. I think we've, I highlighted the comments that were provided earlier, including the comment that came in just very recently from Mr. Cannon in regards to the affordable housing piece.
Yes.
So I think that's covered off all the items.
Okay. Is the remaining member of the public wishing to speak, or is he with your team?
That remaining member is with me.
Okay, awesome. Okay, glad to have him here. All right, so then, are there any other comments from council colleagues? And at this point, Ms. Martin, you're not expecting us to move forward with anything at this time?
That is correct, Your Worship. Tonight is simply to consider the merits of the planning application for a plan of subdivision and hear public comment. No decisions being made tonight on that, but you will need to defer the recommendation in regards to the zoning amendment.
Okay, I'll look for a mover and a seconder for that. Councillor Barclay, Councillor Wilson. And this is that council defers bylaw 65-2022. Is that what you wish the wording to be, Amy? Or Jessica? Yep, good. Okay. Council defers bylaw 65-22 being a deeming bylaw for the lands legally described as lots 1 to 27. Oh, we've got new language. All right. Okay, that's better recommendation. All right. Receive the report titled Plan of Subdivision and defer bylaw 64-22 to amend the comprehensive zoning bylaw to rezone the property legally described as concession for part of lot 17, geographic township of Oxford and Rideau from rural to residential first density. So I think mover and seconder, I'll call the question. All in favor? Fine, thank you. That deferral stands. All right, thank you for being here this evening. We look forward to seeing you again, I guess.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, so we have 3 additional items, colleagues. It's 9:09. Do you need a breather, or do you want to keep going? I see no appetite for a breather. Okay. Engineering standards for design approval and construction. Oh, I apologize. Now is the deeming bylaw. I see. Okay, I apologize. I misread that. So you would like that we proceed with the deeming bylaw? So I'm looking for a mover and a seconder for the deeming bylaw itself? Understood. So this is separate and apart from what we were discussing. I get it. I got it. Okay. All right, Ms. Martin, over to you.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this is a rather more administrative function under the Planning Act. I'll just wait for the presentation to come up. I think the computer's tired too. There it goes. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So a bit of background. So Plan 1114 was registered on April 20th, 1995, which was 27 years ago. So this is the original plan of subdivision, was for 27 rural estate lots and 10 blocks. So the lands that this describes is what will be the Oxford Village subdivision, which is 398 residential units. So the old plan of subdivision, much smaller than that, and currently still exists on title. So the subdivision agreement is still registered on these lands. What I want to note that is not all lands within Plan 1114 will be subject to the deeming bylaw, and only lands that pertain to the Oxford Village subdivision and owned by such are subject to this bylaw. Next slide, please. So what is a deeming bylaw? A deeming bylaw is a bylaw that is passed by a municipality that deems a lot or lots to no longer be lots within a registered plan of subdivision. The bylaw is authorized under Section 54 of the Planning Act, and the plan of subdivision must have been registered for at least 8 years. So we have certainly met that threshold, as this has been on the books for 27 years. Next slide, please. So why is it being required? So, as mentioned, the property currently has a draft plan approved subdivision for 398 residential units, also known as the Oxford Village subdivision. And there's currently another plan of subdivision registered on title. So in order to allow for the new plan of subdivision to proceed, we need to deem the lands under Plan 1114 to no longer be lots within that plan. So it's more of an administrative function under the Planning Act, and then the bylaw must be registered on title as such to ensure that the plan of subdivision is deregistered. Next slide, please. Any questions?
Why is this coming to us now versus 3 months from now or 3 months earlier? What's the moment for deeming? Is it that the developer is ready to proceed with building permits? What creates the conditions for you to ask for a deeming?
So the condition was more of it was a request that was submitted by the applicant's planning representatives. It is a draft condition, so working towards the registration of the plan of subdivision, this is one of the items that needs to be completed in order to fill those draft conditions. So it's just more of that administrative function. From a timing perspective, it was just we had received the request and were able to process it for this meeting.
And having never seen a deeming bylaw before, why would it have been in a draft condition of this particular subdivision, or is it common across subdivisions?
So it's a draft condition because there's already a plan of subdivision registered on title. In order to allow for the new plan of subdivision to be registered when they're ready to be registered, you need to remove that older plan of subdivision first. So it's more of a title and legal matter. So to ensure we're not creating any issues with title when the new lots are created, the deeming bylaw essentially erases the previous subdivision agreement that's registered against those lands and would allow for the new subdivision agreement to be registered for the 398 units.
And do we have a new subdivision agreement?
No, not at this time. We're currently still working through that process. And again, this is one of the draft conditions. So this must be satisfied prior to us signing off on our conditions to the county. So we're just working through the draft conditions with the developer and his team.
And would council see a new subdivision agreement if a new one is being drafted?
So approval of the subdivision would come before council. So yes, so when that is ready at such a time, it'll come before you.
So the deeming is a precondition to enter into to a new subdivision agreement?
The deeming bylaw is one of the conditions to allow for the registration of the new plan of subdivision. So in order for the counties to sign off on the plan of subdivision to allow for registration, the deeming bylaw has to be completed.
And the subdivision in question is the 383 homes, is that correct?
So for the new subdivision, 390 units, yes, but there's currently the 27 lot plan of subdivision that's registered on title.
Okay. I think I've exhausted that line of questioning. Still not entirely solid, but I'll take it. Councillor O'Sullivan.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor, to Director Martin. So When I saw this subdivision site plan for, or the plan for the subdivision for Oxford Village that had the 398, excuse me, there was no park in there. And I understood that we couldn't request that the developer put a park in there because it was a draft subdivision that had been received draft approval, and which in my mind then meant that draft approval was total approval because we couldn't change anything. I might be wrong in what I'm understanding here, but now we're trying to deem the original 27 lots to be gone, history, and change it now to the new 398, and yet we can't request that there's a park put in it?
Sorry, through your worship to Councillor Sullivan. Draft plan approval's already been granted for the plan of subdivision. I can't go back and amend those the draft conditions as they exist today without opening up that process. We're not here in this application discussing the merits of the proposed plan of subdivision that has draft plan approval for the Oxford Village subdivision. The function of the deeming bylaw is just to remove the existing plan 1114, which is a registered plan of subdivision for the 27 lots off title. So we're not reopening the discussion as to what happened back in 2017 when draft plan approval was initially given. This is just more of an administrative function to address what's legally on title currently right now in regards to plan 1114.
I guess that's why I would question, like the mayor has questioned, why is this coming now? Why wouldn't this have had to have happened back in 2017 before he got approval, draft approval for the new subdivision when they already had the old one?
So it's a condition of the draft. It's one of the draft conditions that was provided back in 2017. So to allow for the registration of the new plan of subdivision when they get to that point of registration, the old plan of subdivision, which has the subdivision agreement registered on title, needs to be removed through the deeming bylaw in order to allow for the new plan of subdivision to come forward. So we're not considering the application of the new plan of subdivision in the sense of like we're approving an agreement that's going to now be registered on title. We're just trying to, from a title perspective, remove the current plan of subdivision agreement that is registered against the lands to allow for, when the time is right, for it to come forward. And again, it's a draft condition. So they're working through their draft conditions, and it's just an administrative function.
Mr. Dyke is going to offer a comment.
I think from a clarity standpoint, a strong analogy would be this is no different than the condition of rezoning for a subdivision. So deeming bylaws are complicated or can be complicated. This is similar, just simply a condition. So no different than when an applicant comes forward to fulfill a condition of rezoning for a subdivision. You're not debating the merits of the subdivision application itself. You're debating the merits of the requested rezoning that was part of the subdivision approval.
Okay, it just seems backwards.
I might just add, normally, the deeming would have been taken care of at the first time it went through. So what Director Martin and her team are doing is actually cleaning up a previous application that probably wasn't vetted, I shouldn't say that, was done a little differently than we do them now.
Okay.
Let's call this an administrative fix. All right, so I'll look for a mover and a seconder for the recommendation as presented. Councillor Barclay, Councillor Wilson. I don't think I need to read it. I think it's there for all to see. And it's an approval of bylaw 6522. All right, I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, we'll carry on. I may need to call a break, but we'll see how our next item takes us, and that is the engineering standards for design, approval, and construction. Update, council colleagues, would you like a break now or in 10 minutes? Let's get through the presentation and then we'll see how it goes. Is this, Karen, a substantial presentation?
I can be as quickly as you wish.
Okay. Okay, would you prefer a break, Council? Is that the appetite?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Let's break.
Take a break.
Good.
Okay, we're back. We're reconvening. We have 3 remaining items, and we'll invite Ms. Dunlop to speak to engineering standards.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. So this evening, the purpose of tonight's report is to recommend the adoption of the engineering standards. Next slide. First, a brief agenda. I'll provide a bit of a background on the project, then what are the engineering standards, who will use them, and how they will be used. We will conclude the presentation with highlighting the next steps. Next slide. The Public Works Department has been working with JP2G to develop an updated engineering standards document. These standards are based on industry requirements and standards, municipal input, and stakeholder consultation. Next slide. The engineering standards are council-approved municipal guidelines that provide direction to the development community on minimum standards for design and construction. The intention of the standards is to lay out municipal requirements for all municipal services, such as general plan and submission requirements, transportation, both vehicle and pedestrian, stormwater, wastewater, drinking water, street lighting, utilities, and lot development. Next slide. These engineering standards are primarily used by municipal staff, including Public Works, Planning, and Parks and Recreation, land developers and their representatives, consultants, builders, and municipal consultants. Next slide. The guidelines will be used to establish a minimum standard of what should be included and what will be accepted in an engineering submission regarding municipal infrastructure. The standards will also provide guidance on how the submission should be developed and how municipal services should be designed and constructed. Next slide. To date, the standards have been fully developed and are ready for council endorsement. Once adopted, the municipality will work with the planning department and the development community to incorporate the standards into regular processes, procedures, and everyday operations. Finally, this document will be ever-evolving. Next slide. Being a technical document and understanding the direct implications to the municipality, the development community, and the public, this document remains a living, working document even after adoption. As industry standards change, new technologies and applications are developed, regular use of the document will highlight gaps, and wishes of the community may change. This document must change as well. As such, the Public Works Department commits to updating this document on an ongoing basis as needed. These regular updates will be in consultation with the appropriate stakeholders. Additionally, as this brand new document, the municipality will have a formal review with the development community in approximately 6 months. This will allow time to assess how it is incorporated into current development applications and to ensure that the standards provide the necessary direction and intended guidance to the municipality and the development community. We will provide council an update at that time should the gaps identified be significant. We also commit to a full review and update every 5 years, as is typical with a master plan, to ensure that this document grows with the community and with lessons learned. Next slide. So thank you. That completes the presentation, and I welcome the opportunity for comments and questions.
Thank you, Karen. What do you think is the biggest difference now that you have this technical set of guidelines before you, right? Subject, of course, to their adoption by council. What is the difference between having this very comprehensive technical document versus not having it? And where do you think there's been a significant change, or have there been significant changes in terms of some of the guidelines that are provided?
Briefly, it's clarity. In other words, it's clarity in regards to engineering expectations and submissions, as well as the lessons learned as engineering staff mature. I know from my perspective, from a function, it's the idea that we need a place to put a snowbank. So it's really not a good idea to put a sidewalk against a curb, and that's reflected in the drawings. The idea that we tell developers that we want pre-development flows and post-development flows for stormwater they must be demonstrated. Certain storm events must be demonstrated as part of their reports. Certain storm functions, such as the Chicago versus the Ottawa basis for storms, has to be incorporated. So these are the little, the nuances that provide that clarity in black and white that developers can use as they put their submissions to North Grenville for review.
And will this inform subdivision agreements?
This will inform the engineering component of a subdivision submission, but not the subdivision document itself. That's the planning design, or the planning guidelines that will go down that path. But it will say, when planning says there should be a sidewalk, this document will say it's 1.5 meters of concrete offset by a minimum meter by the edge of the driving for function. So this is the function versus the aesthetic of the planning.
And your view, is it most useful for existing or for new?
New.
New. Does that have applicability to existing?
If we're going in as a municipality to rehabilitate certain things,
Right.
It does.
Colleagues, any other questions? Councillor Barclay?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I believe Director Dunlop is somewhat clairvoyant because she provided a lot of information I was going to ask her about concerning stormwater and generally what's changed or what's been added or elaborated on from what we had previously. So I understand that this is a document that says engineering standards for municipal services, but did I recall that it also sets standards for the construction and design of municipal facilities? And are there, and are there any provisions for green building initiatives as part of those engineering standards?
Through you, Your Worship. Councillor Barclay, the guidelines do provide for certain provisions, especially under Section C, which is the largest of the components in this document, which are stormwater. It does provide for the provision of low-impact development stormwater plans. It doesn't dictate which model has to be used, but it does ask for consideration of that type of low-impact development. It does not get into the idea of a green building or anything to that effect.
Other questions, colleagues? In terms of the Parks and Rec elements, the Parks and Recreation implications, if you will, are in regards to, again, some of those engineering standards when it comes to shaping those elements of any Parks and Rec facility.
It impacts the infrastructure that would be incorporated as part of a parks facility. It does not say that a playground will be here. It does not say that we will have a junior parkette versus a walking path versus any function within the park itself. That is left up to the Parks Department and their master planning documents. It just indicates access to and connections.
These guidelines are separate and apart from some planning guidelines, right? Design plan guidelines? Is this all part of the same package, or there was consideration of another framework in which sort of planning would take place, or is this all encompassing in this one document? Maybe Ms. Dunlop, you can answer that? Or Ms. Martin?
Go ahead. Thank you, Your Worship. Director Dunlop and I always like to say that planning is the fun and public works is the function. And certainly the intent behind the design guidelines is that on the planning side is to help provide that overall, here's how we want to see our community develop. So we talk about interconnectivity, we talk about, parkland provision, and that is addressed through the pre-consultation stage, right through up to draft conditions on a plan of subdivision. Director Guy sits at the table, as well as Director Dunlop and myself, as part of those discussions. So the planning guidelines work hand in hand with the engineering side, and that we can identify the parkland requirements, and then the infrastructure piece, when it comes to the development of the land on the engineering side, would then be addressed through the engineering standards.
So, but just to be clear for the public, the planning guidelines have already been adopted by this council, correct?
That is correct.
So this is really about the mechanics or the function, to your point.
Certainly, yes. And I believe it was through the development of the engineering standards that council gave the direction to staff to say we need some planning design guidelines to assist the engineering standards to really round out council's vision for development in North Grenville.
And just quickly, if there was a sidewalk envisioned for an existing road that was particularly narrow, right? This is an existing road that's been here for many, many years, but it's in contravention of what's stated in the engineering guidelines. What would you do in that instance? Does it take the sidewalk off the table, or is there room to accommodate some of those retroactive measures that wouldn't have been contemplated 40, 60, 20 years ago?
The engineering guidelines do provide typical cross-sections for smaller road allowances up to a 26 meters, anywhere from an 18 or 16 to a 26. So the idea that if we're going to retrofit for a sidewalk, the intent would be, this is the guideline, we'd try to follow this if at all humanly possible, but the idea it also gives the premise. The idea that we should have snow storage, we should make sure that the sidewalk is as far away from where a vehicle is for the idea of a zero straight, the idea that we're trying to protect the pedestrian public, so it wouldn't put it off the table.
Would it discourage or dissuade, or you would just make the case for the exception?
The case for the exception, this would be a partner document that would go with the roadway classifications. So those two documents would typically set the standard. And if there was something, of course, subdivisions always come back to council as part of their approval. So it would be an ongoing, evolving process. This sets a standard that we typically try to follow.
Last question. If you had a subdivision developer who said, you guys, your standards are too high, they're not achievable, we've never seen this before, nobody else asks that we conform with this precision or with this degree of detail to various criteria, what would you say in that instance?
This guideline sets a specific standard. It also provides the department, not only the planning, but the public works department, a specific amount of muscle, if I can use that term, in regards to getting those additional criteria. These are one of the things that council and the community wishes to see, and the development community has been part of the process in developing these, and thankfully we had a few developers that took very detailed considerations into the document itself.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Just to add to Ms. Dunlop's comments, it would be, a lot of work has gone into putting these documents together and a lot of consultation. So in my opinion, when council adopts these policies, it would have to be an extraordinarily compelling argument on behalf of the developer why we should deviate from our guideline.
That's what I was hoping to hear. Okay. Any other questions, Councillor Barclay?
Yeah, earlier in your post-presentation, you mentioned some examples, including verifying post-development flows as opposed to pre-development flows. Flow referring to the velocity of water, not necessarily the volume of water. What kind of verification? Have we not required verification in the past, and what kind of verification are we requiring for the future?
We have required it in the past, but this provides the, again, the muscle in regards to require it. We have always required post-development flows to be equivalent or less than the pre-development flows, depending on their location and site-specific considerations. So this provides the guidelines to get there. Sorry. The intent is that stormwater controls can be very contentious, as we've heard through many of the planning functions this evening, and the intent is that this, as stormwater is the thickest part of this document, will have many controls.
But just to follow up, but you mentioned verify. How do we verify that post-development flows are equal to pre-development flows?
The professional engineer has to stamp a specific drawing, as well as background stormwater report. The catchments have to be identified, the flows have to be, we do not do verification that way except through a potential third party, but a PEng, a professional engineer, has to stamp and verify that the pre and post balance, as well as how the flows go, both quantity, quality, flow, velocity.
Is there anything else on the part of council colleagues? Councillor O'Sullivan?
Thank you, through you, to Director Dunlop. I think kudos to you and your team for putting together such a very comprehensive document of standards. And I noticed that under sidewalks, you've talked about tactile walking surface indicators, and so I'm really appreciate the attention to accessibility standards that need to be met. And so I just wanted to thank you for making sure those were included. Thanks.
Okay, anything else, colleagues, that we want to bring to the table? If, excuse me, if not, then we will proceed with the recommendation that council receive the report titled Engineering Standards for Design Approval and Construction, and that council approve the updated engineering standards for design approval and construction. Mover, seconder, Councillor Barclay, Councillor Strachian. Any final comments before I call the vote? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Good, thanks. Thank you for your work. I'm sure it was a labor of love. And now it'll be hopefully deployed effectively. All right, we'll go on to our next item, which is Green Stream Project Transfer Payment Agreement for the Concession Road water main. And I am receiving some questions about what's happening on concessions. So have residents been informed about this particular project?
Well, this specific project, or the what we're going to be discussing tonight, is grant funding that we were successful in regards to the replacement of the water main. In the 2022 budget, you did approve an allotment for the design of the replacement of the Concession Road water main, but no construction or anything to that effect has taken place. The only activity I believe is going on in Concession Road specific would be on the Habitat for Humanity site, as well as some IPM activity.
That being said, I understand that this grant enables, right, the replacement of the water main.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so over to you.
So the purpose of tonight's report is to receive a resolution from council to enter into the transfer payment agreement for the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program Green Stream, or ICIP, for the Concession Water Main Replacement Project. Next slide. The ICIP program is a federal program with provincial and municipal partnerships designed for long-term economic growth and to build sustainable, resilient communities. In July, the municipality received notice of approval to enter into transfer payment agreement to receive the funding for the project. Next slide. The estimated cost of the project is $977,000 for the replacement of the water mains from Prescott Street to the public school. An allotment for design was included in the 2022 water and sewer budget. The municipality is eligible to receive almost $326,000 from the province and $391,000 from the federal government. The balance of the project, estimated at a little over $260,000, is to be funded by the Water and Sewer Division. Next slide. In order to receive this funding allocation, council is required to pass a resolution to enter into the agreement and to provide an executed agreement on or before August the 26th. Next slide. It is recommended that council pass a resolution of support as outlined in the report and authorize mayor and clerk to sign the necessary agreement. That completes my report.
So, council colleagues, any questions in regards to Karen's report? Councillor Barclay?
Just what's next on our list in terms of infrastructure projects that we're applying for?
The next on our list will be options presented to council as we go into the budget, but it will be either Clothier Street or the Saunders-Rideau roads. The underground infrastructure needs some action.
Anything else in regards to this particular application? Ms. Dunlop, it is possible to continue applying for funds under the Green Stream project, correct? Is this our first time with having success with this grant application?
I believe that other departments have been successful. We have, they keep changing the names of some of the funds. So we've been successful under the OCIP. We've been successful under other streams. And our new grant, Christina Chen, has been active in regards to looking for alternative funding. And right now, green funding is predominantly pollinator gardens, other type of naturalization products. So hopefully something else will pop up, and we'll get some additional funding for other infrastructure.
So to be clear, in budget 2022, did we anticipate doing the full water main, or is this funding now the catalyst for 2023 budget dollars?
That is correct. The council approved a budget allotment for the design of the concession road water main in anticipation and in the hopes that we would be successful in this funding.
Do you have the budget allocation required to complete the works?
To complete the design work, yes.
Only design.
And then we will do, the 2023 will come forward with a request for the capital allotment for the construction.
And the external grant only covers design, or would cover part of the construction? That's where I'm confused.
It's capital.
It would cover the capital?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, colleagues,
I am. So thank you, Your Worship. Tonight's presentation is regarding the play structure tender award for Crozier Park in the hamlet of Oxford Mills and Oxford Station Park in the hamlet of Oxford Station. Next slide, please. The municipality received 2 submissions in response to the release of the RFP. One was from New World Park Playground and Playground Planners. The proposals were evaluated against the technical and financial criteria. The evaluations were done by the Director of Parks and Recreation, the Recreation Coordinator, the Facility Superintendent, and the Recreation Coordinator's summer student interns. Next slide, please. Funding for each play structure is from the Participation Award of $100,000 to the municipality as Canada's most active community in 2021. Due to supply chain delays, the project completion date is spring 2023. Timeframe, although not ideal, is still within the parameters of the participation funding timelines, which is 2 years, June 2023. We expect the installation to take place in May of 2023. A community survey was provided for feedback regarding design features and colors. The survey results showed the community had a strong desire for option 2, cool blue for Oxford Station, and option 1 for Oxford Mills in the forest green color. Next slide. So you can see the pictures of Crozier Park. One for Crozier Park and the one for Oxford Station Park is on the next slide. And just of a matter of letting you know of note for Crozier Park, the existing standalone dinosaur features and existing swings will not be altered, and neither will the existing swings at Oxford Station Park. They will remain intact. So the recommendation is to award the proposal contract to Playground Planners in the amount of $67,293.23, which includes HST for the supply and installation of the play structure and play features at Oxford Station Park and Crozier Park.
okay, colleagues, any questions or concerns? Councillors O'Sullivan and Barclay, go ahead.
Thank you very much, through you to Director Guy. I understood in our conversations that there were going to be some accessibility features included in these. Is that, pardon me? There are?
There are accessibility features proposed in each play feature.
Great. Okay, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
And do you know what they would be? Because I don't think it's obvious from the design. Are you saying the design accommodates some accessibility? Or is there additional accessibility contemplated?
As part of the tender document, both documents in the scope of work ask for accessibility features to be part of both features, both playgrounds. And as you can see, if we pull it up again, there are transfer stations that children can move from one section of the play structure to another. There's also activity boards underneath the one area of the play structure where children in wheelchairs can go and use those boards. Also, the surface is an engineered wood fiber that is an accessibility feature for both play areas.
And would these designs typically, not to delay, because believe me, I don't think anyone wants to delay, but would there be value in getting feedback, not just for these, or perhaps not for these, but for future play structures from the Accessibility Committee? I can see some modest accessibility provisions, but I expect that as play structures evolve, there's probably even more ways to make them truly accessible.
We did have some feedback from our Accessibility Advisory Committee through the community survey. They were able to provide us some feedback and seemed satisfied with the structures. Obviously, there is always ways that we can try and improve accessibility within our play areas and our play structures, and we will continue to do that as a department.
Okay. Any other comments? Councillor Barclay, go.
Yeah, it's just a question about the budget and the quote, 67,000. I know when we were spitballing how the different communities would be allocated funds, it was like 30, 30, 30, and 10. So is this preventing any recreational facilities being installed in Burt's Rapids or Bishop's Mills? Are those two projects under budget or in the ballpark?
Through your worship to Councillor Barclay, we've allotted $30,000 for each of these play structures, so they did come in within budget. The Bishop's Mills new rink house is currently underway, the construction. We've removed the existing rink house facility and are working on the construction of the new facility. We have $30,000 allotted for that. At this point, it's on budget. And as far as Burt's Rapids goes, I've been working with the Public Works Department to get some form of a quote for resurfacing their basketball area, and Director Dunlop's been assisting me with that. And it appears that the $10,000 should cover that if that's what the Burt's Rapids community decides to go through. I know they've been talking about potentially doing something else with the $10,000. If that's the case, I'll have to bring this back to council for consideration.
So the fact that it's $7,000 over doesn't impact the other two projects?
That is correct.
Okay, thanks.
So, Mark, I'm sure you're aware of an email that was sent on July 10th from the Burt's Rapids Community Association that proposed a more comprehensive, I guess, overhaul of their park or some of the amenities right behind the community association. I know, having been there last night, as many of us were, for a different conversation, some interest was expressed on Parks and Rec's appetite to work with them on this proposal, which I think goes well beyond what had been initially proposed. There is a basketball hoop suggested here, and probably the concrete pad. I think, obviously, due to the excitement of having secured last year's participation dollars and then some additional, more modest dollars this year, the Birds Rapids Community Association is sort of using some of that momentum. So perhaps it would be valuable to have a discussion formally with the association and sort of get a sense of what is their, I think, bigger vision now. Because I'm taking a look at it, and it's certainly something that I think they're excited about. So have you had any formal communications?
I've had some initial discussions, or at least an email back and forth with Inga.
Yep.
Just regarding their plan, and did offer any assistance I could provide, or even suggest some potential grant programs that they may be able to access to further their plan.
Okay. Okay. So with that in mind, Council, we have the motion before us. Forgive me, Jessica, I've lost it. It's right here. Right, got it. Okay, so who would like to move and second? Okay, Councilors Wilson and Strachian, sorry, lead left this time. Approve the award of contract for the design, supply, and installation of an accessible play structure and play features at Oxford Station Park and Crozier Park to playground planners pursuant to request for proposal for a total cost of $67,293.23. Authorize the Director of Parks, Rec, and Culture or his designate to execute the contract on behalf of the municipality. Just one other question, Mr. Guy, in terms of supply chains, I assume the order will be made upon approval of the tender?
That is correct. It's one of the reasons I brought the report through tonight, so we can get the order made to ensure that the installation will take place.
And is it the delivery that's slowing things down, or is it the installation?
Pardon me?
Is it the delivery of the play structures that is delaying things until spring 2023, or is it the installation on our end?
No, it's more supply chain. From what we've been told, playground planners, basically they're installing 2021 projects in 2022. So the fact that we were able to, we didn't get this tender through until 2022, it's delayed until 2023, but they have guaranteed us that we will have the installation done in time.
Okay. And there is a firm commitment on the supply end, or do they just ballpark when they think they would get the product to us?
They didn't really say, they just mentioned that they wouldn't have what we require to be able to do the installation until next year.
The timeline for participation dollars is July 2023? Is it a 2-year window to spend the $100,000?
The participation dollars? It's, I think it's the end of June 2023 that we have to spend the funds.
Okay, Councillor Wilson?
Through you, Your Worship, to Mark Guy. You have the established cost and of what it will be. Is there any, do you see a problem with the price increasing, or is that a locked-in price that we will be paying?
No, that will be a locked-in price.
And labor costs would also.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Parks and Recreation staff we will do the removal of the existing play structures ourselves. So this is just the installation of the new equipment.
Okay.
So that's a locked-in price.
I'm just worried that the costs may go up. Anyways, thanks.
Sorry, Your Worship, I was having a hard time hearing you. I think I got what you were asking.
I think we're good. Okay, anything else? Councillor Sullivan?
Just to clarify, in conversations with Director Guy, we had talked about the $30,000 for each of the projects, and then Director Guy had indicated that there was extra money in the PRC budget to upgrade them to include the accessibility features that would come separately from the participation money from Parks and Rec. So that's why the $67,000 for the two of them. And, there was something else I was going to say. Oh, I tried to order a bike rack for Holy Cross Church, and when I talked to, actually it turned out to be the same company that we use, I was told that there was a big shortage of steel, and they could hardly guarantee when they could deliver the bike racks because they had to wait till they got the steel. And they also said that the price fluctuated all the time on the steel, so I think it's something that everybody's dealing with, so I guess that's just life post-COVID. Anyway, I'm really happy that we're getting these done sooner than later. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so some ginger ale went down the wrong way. So I apologize. I'll call the question, please. All in favor? Good, that passes. So I think we're perilously close to adjournment. Jessica, I think we're almost through. Is that correct?
That's correct, Your Worship.
Okay, so thank you for your indulgence this evening, Council. I've lost my place in our agenda. There it is. So, last items, no other business. Any notices of motion, Council colleagues? Okay. I think we've dealt with all the bylaws, is that right?
That's correct, Your Worship.
Okay. Any remaining questions? Of course, no member of the public is with us at this hour. Anything by email?
I have received no comment, Your Worship.
Excellent. So close of the bylaw. Perhaps you could read the confirmation bylaw.
Be it resolved that bylaw 67-22 to confirm the proceedings of council at its regular meeting held on August 10th, 2022, be adopted and passed.
Mover and seconder, please. Thank you. I'll call the question. All in favor? Thank you. Motion to adjourn at 10:04 p.m. Councillor Wilson. Do you want to move and second, Councillor Wilson? To highlight your enthusiasm, I need a seconder, please. Seconder. Thank you, Councillor Strachan. I'm calling the question. All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you.